Varys never expected to see the day when he would voluntarily remove himself from the shadows of the Red Keep. Yet here he stood, at the cusp of a new dawn, a small rowboat gliding across Blackwater Bay in the hush before sunrise. For so many years, he had called King's Landing his home, or rather, his web. He was the master of whisperers, the spider who wove his delicate strands into every corner of the realm. But now, the den of lions had proven too perilous a nest for him to remain. If he stayed, his life was forfeit. The last conversation he had with the Queen, or at least the one who presumed to sit upon the Iron Throne, had left him reeling, though he wore his composure well. There was a moment in which Varys had sensed the tang of dragonfire on the wind. Rumors traveled swiftly, whispered by the young and the old alike. The Queen, once a breaker of chains, had grown uneasy, perhaps maddened, by the weight of betrayal and loss. Tyrion Lannister, once a friend, had grown powerless in the face of that tide. Varys knew that if the Queen's handmaiden discovered what Varys suspected, it would be his head, then his body would be ash. So he acted. With one final bribe to the gold cloaks standing vigil on the docks, he slipped away in the quietest hours. His only companions were a pair of loyal lads who had served him in King's Landing, orphans whose skills in stealth he had cultivated. Their names were Jaren and Kaelio, nimble-fingered and bright-eyed. They had grown up in Flea Bottom, learned to climb the tallest rooftops without a sound, slip through the tightest corridors under the keep, and listen at windows with uncanny patience. Varys had saved them from the hardships of the street. Little more than starvation and hopelessness waited for them there. Now they followed him, trusting that wherever Varys led, they might find a life more stable than the cunning labyrinth of the capital. The sun was but a pale rumor along the horizon when Varys felt the gentle sand beneath his shoes on the far side of the bay. His rowboat scraped onto the shore of a deserted, pebbly beach. Seaweed clung to the rocks and the smell of brine hung heavy in the air. A single gull cried above, circling. Varys turned to Jaren and Kaelio, assisting them out of the boat. The hush felt sacred, like a new vow unspoken. Varys closed his eyes, letting the sea breeze wash over his bald head. Here we are, he thought, free of the Red Keep's watchful eyes. The sense of liberation stirred something in him he had not felt in decades, hope. The Master of Whisperers was not a man who acted upon whim. In fact, he had carefully set aside small caches of gold in every major city in Westeros and Essos, prepared for a day such as this. Even so, making that final decision to betray the monarchy he had once served, or at least acquiesced to, was not simple. Yet Varys had always believed in one principle above all others, the good of the realm. But the realm, as he had often tried to explain to Tyrion, was not the sum of all kings and queens, but the countless nameless folk who tilled fields, baked bread, and forged steel. It was the impoverished children scraping by in the alleys, the seamstresses who sold their last possessions just to feed their families, the blacksmith who hammered his heart out in every horseshoe. It was the men and women who bore the brunt of every noble's war. Varys, after witnessing one too many tyrannies, had decided to do what he had always been rumored to want, to rise beyond the Game of Thrones and found a place that truly served the needs of the smallfolk. In secret, he had spent years gleaning intelligence about a remote region east of Westeros, an uninhabited island chain said to exist in the Shivering Sea. Cartographers' notes were scarce, but once, a pirate's letter had made mention of a hidden archipelago beyond even the known coasts, a place so cold and stormy that few had ventured there. Over time, rumors spoke of one isle in particular that had a natural harbor and was fertile enough for settlement. It was scarcely on any official map, yet Varys had seen references in the diaries of explorers, in the clandestine trade logs of the free cities. He had arranged a ship to sail him there under the guise of a merchant route. But to get aboard that ship he had to escape King's Landing unnoticed. That was the step he had just taken. The rowboat had brought them to a small cove where a two-masted vessel awaited, crewed by a captain who owed him more than one favor. Varys led the two boys across the beach, ignoring the briny chill in the wind, until they saw a flicker of torchlight in the distance. The silhouette of the ship, moored in a natural inlet, rose like a specter in the dawn. As the first rays of sunlight streaked the sky, the trio quietly climbed the gangplank, greeted by a tall, sinewy man with salt and pepper hair. Captain Merrick bowed his head slightly. "Lord Varys," he said, though he tried to keep his voice low. "We're ready to set sail at your command." "Then let us waste no time," Varys replied. "We must leave these shores before the Lannisters or their queen realizes something is amiss." Not an hour later, the sails were unfurled and the wind caught them. The ship glided away from the coast, out into open waters, leaving behind King's Landing as a jagged silhouette receding behind them. Jaren and Kaelio leaned over the rails, wide-eyed at the vast horizon. Neither had ever left the capital. For them, this was an entirely new world. Varys himself stood at the stern, gaze fixed on that diminishing shape. He felt no sadness in leaving the city. He had once told Tyrion that he did not fear death, he had already been dead in so many ways. But there was a sliver of regret that he could not do more to save it from itself. War, famine, disease, the constant churn of power struggles, this was the tapestry of King's Landing. Yet on the horizon, a new design awaited. If Varys could truly carve out a land for the common folk, a place of justice and prosperity, then perhaps his life's work would amount to more than whispers. In the weeks of voyage that followed, the ship navigated the coasts of the Narrow Sea, heading northward past the Vale, skirting the port towns discreetly, seeking provisions in small, obscure harbors rather than any large city that might have recognized the Spider. Varys maintained a low profile, rarely stepping onto the docks. Instead, he sent Captain Merrick or one of the more trusted crew members to secure goods. His entire bearing was that of a passenger of moderate means, and the vessel itself sailed under a charter claiming it transported wine casks for the northern lords. If any prying eyes inquired, they'd find casks below deck, though hidden among them were also small containers of gold, letters of introduction to potential allies, and books of knowledge on governance, agriculture, shipbuilding, and more. The seas grew colder as they passed beyond the familiar routes. Gray skies became the norm, and the water itself took on a steel-blue hue. Closer to the shivering sea, the weather was capricious. Storms erupted unexpectedly, lashing the sails with freezing rain. On such nights, Varys would remain in his small cabin, reading by the glow of a single lantern while the ship rocked violently. He tried to glean every scrap of knowledge he could about founding a settlement, aware that he was treading uncharted territory in more ways than one. Jaren and Kallio tried to help where they could. Jaren was adept at listening in on the crew's gossip, learning how to tie knots and manage rigging, while Kallio practiced forging little tools or mending broken deck planks. Both asked Varys the same question in private. Why are we going so far away? Can't we just live in some other city in Westeros or Essos? Varys's answer was always patient but unwavering, because no matter where we go, the Game of Thrones persists. Princes and tyrants and hungry lords remain. If we want to build something free from that, we must look to a place no one has claimed. Weeks bled into months and the supplies dwindled. Twice they stopped at small, unknown islands to rest and gather fresh water. The climate was harsh and the crew grew tired. Yet they kept onward, for Captain Merrick believed in Varys's gold and quietly admired the man's vision. A hush fell one morning when the lookout shouted from the crow's nest, "Land ahead." It was a misty dawn, and at first nothing but a gray haze lay before them. Then, from the swirling fog, a line of dark cliffs emerged. The surf crashed against their base in a thunderous roar. Towering coniferous trees coated the cliff tops like an armored crown. The wind had the bite of ice in it. Varys joined the captain at the bow. With a sinking feeling, he thought, what if the place is too cold, too inhospitable? Then again, the notes had said there was one place, a sheltered harbor further along the coast. The ship sailed northward, hugging the coastline, scanning for a natural inlet. And there, as if by some small miracle, they found it, a crescent bay with calm waters protected by two jutting arms of land. The ship slipped into this bay as silently as a ghost. The water was still, reflecting a sky that was now clearing, revealing the pale sun. All around them, the forested cliffs gave way to rolling hills and stone outcrops. It looked not exactly inviting, but it had potential. Captain Merrick ordered the anchor dropped. Jaren and Kallio crowded beside Varys, excitement warring with apprehension in their eyes. For Varys, an odd sense of destiny overcame him. After a lifetime of maneuvering through the labyrinthine intrigues of Westeros, he stood at the threshold of something unthinkable, an entirely new realm, unclaimed and unseen, where he could, if fortune favored him, build a refuge for the lowborn, the humble, and the overlooked. They lowered a skiff and rowed ashore. A thin layer of frost cracked underfoot as they landed on a beach made of smooth stones. The pine scent was sharp and the sound of rustling branches sang of isolation. Over the next few days, the crew explored the inland, discovering a source of fresh water, small game, and an abundance of fish near the coast. The soil, though not the richest, could be worked with effort. The climate was reminiscent of the north, though perhaps slightly milder due to the coastal influence. Varys made a decision. This would be their place. He named it Dawn's Reach for the silver-pink hue of the morning sun that painted the eastern cliffs each day. Dawn's Reach would be the beginning of something new. But how to found a kingdom with only a handful of sailors and 2 children? That was the question. Of course, Varys had considered that from the start. His plan was multifaceted. Use the gold he had accumulated to secure loyal men and women from across the sea. convinced them through persuasion and promise to come to Dawn's Reach where they could govern themselves without the tyranny of lords. He would lead, but not as a king on a throne. Instead, he envisioned a council, a structure that allowed everyone a voice. Still, the distance was great and recruiting would take time. First, he needed a settlement, a foothold, something that would serve as the beacon for those who might join. That meant building structures, setting up farmland, crafting a safe harbor. Captain Merrick, who had thought his job ended with delivering Varys, found himself intrigued by the prospect of shaping a new land. The promise of wealth was attractive, but there was also an undeniable allure to being part of something fresh, unsullied by old wars. Little by little, they went to work. Trees were felled to create timber for rudimentary huts along the natural harbor. Varys set up a makeshift storehouse for supplies. He commissioned the first building, a sturdy hall that would serve as a communal gathering place and store for valuables. Over the next few months, word spread quietly. Merrick's ship returned to certain ports in the north, quietly recruiting individuals who had grown tired of savage winters and lordly demands. Fishermen with no coin to pay their taxes came. Runaway apprentices from the eastern lands who sought freedom from guild masters joined. All were promised a new start. They trickled in, first by the handfuls, then by the dozens. Varys greeted each group personally. He offered them tasks suited to their talents: woodcutting, fishing, carpentry, hunting. For those with knowledge of healing herbs, he encouraged them to set up a rudimentary infirmary. The resources were scarce at first, but the community strove together. Over campfires at night, these new arrivals told stories of injustice, of oppressive taxes, of manipulative lords, and the endless cycles of violence that plagued the kingdoms. They all gazed upon Varys with a guarded reverence. They knew him by reputation, the spider, the master manipulator who whispered in the ear of kings. Why would he do all this? But as the months turned into seasons, Dawn's Reach grew from a sprawl of tents and huts into a budding settlement. Walls of sharpened logs were erected around the main cluster of buildings to keep out wild predators. A modest wooden pier jutted into the calm waters of the bay, allowing ships to dock properly. Agriculture was more challenging. The soil needed to be tilled and cleared of rocks, but a few resourceful hands managed small crops of root vegetables, carrots, turnips, onions. They foraged berries and mushrooms from the nearby forest. The people learned to endure the damp chill of this new land, layering furs and stoking fires. Throughout all this, Varys oversaw but did not command. He organized. He negotiated. He listened. In a makeshift council that met in the main hall, he invited representatives from each group: fishermen, loggers, hunters, carpenters, healers, to air concerns and propose solutions. Conflicts arose, as they inevitably do in any community. But Varys dealt with them skillfully, drawing upon his years of experience in the labyrinth of court politics. Here, though, his aim was not to sow chaos but to cultivate unity. To the surprise of many, he insisted that no single person had the final say in the settlement's governance. Decisions were made by majority vote among the council, which grew as the population did. Some in the settlement were uncomfortable with such a novel approach, but others embraced it. For once, they felt their voices mattered. In time, the settlement needed a name. Though Varys had called it Dawn's Reach for his own records, the people took to calling it Haven, for that was what it felt like to them, a refuge from the storms, both literal and metaphorical. Over time, the name stuck. Even Varys began to call it Haven. He never forgot his goal. A place for the common folk, free from the endless wars of Westeros. Yet the question loomed: could they truly stand apart once discovered by powers that might see them as an enticing territory? Would lords come to claim them, or pirates plunder them? Varys' solution lay in strategy. He sent out trusted envoys back to Westeros and Essos, forging quiet alliances with merchant princes, smugglers, even some minor lords who had grown disenchanted with the squabbles of their overlords. In exchange for safe harbor and favorable trade, they supplied Haven with seeds, livestock, and certain luxuries. Everything was carefully balanced to avoid drawing too much attention. Word of a distant settlement where the small folk ruled themselves began to circulate in taverns and dockside haunts. Some dismissed it as a fairy tale, others as a rumor. But a trickle of the desperate and the bold arrived. The population of Haven doubled within a year, then tripled the next. Haven's first trial by fire came one autumn, when a renegade band of sellswords, hearing rumors of a settlement that might be easy pickings, landed on the far side of the island. They torched a fishing camp and killed several innocents before the alarm was raised. Varys, not one for martial prowess himself, nonetheless saw to it that a volunteer militia was formed, led by a seasoned warrior who had fled the Seven Kingdoms after refusing to commit atrocities in a lord's war. The militia confronted the sellswords in the dense forests. Though it was a bloody affair, the defenders prevailed, capturing the band's captain alive. Varys personally attended the sentencing. The people demanded justice for the slain. Yet how to dispense justice in a land with no king, no iron throne, and no ancient laws? Varys convened the council, including the villagers who had lost loved ones. They debated into the night. Some called for immediate execution. Others argued for mercy, banishment, or forced labor. The final decision was to execute the captain for murder while offering the rest of the band a chance to integrate into Haven, under strict supervision, if they renounced violence and swore an oath to protect the community they had harmed. It was a harsh, perhaps naive approach, but Varys believed in offering a path to redemption. The council agreed, albeit warily. When the sentence was carried out at dawn, the entire settlement witnessed the seriousness of their new laws. No one was above accountability. That night, the sellswords who remained knelt before the council, each swearing an oath. Slowly, under watchful eyes, they became part of Haven. Seasons passed. The settlement endured storms, crop failures, the birth of new children, and the passing of elders. Through it all, Varys stood not as a lord but as an advisor, a guide whose talents for negotiation and information gathering kept them safe from external threats. He brokered new trade routes, forging partnerships with clandestine traders from Bravos and Pentos. Haven's defenses improved. Wooden walls gave way to stone fortifications built by skilled masons who sought freedom from guild oppression in Essos. The wharves expanded, and a modest fleet of fishing boats and trade vessels was christened under the banner of a single sigil, a spider in a ring of wheat, symbolizing how cunning and resourcefulness could foster prosperity for the lowly. Varys had once told Tyrion that he served the realm, that his loyalty was to the people, not to any one monarch. In Haven, that ideology found fertile ground. The people understood that they governed themselves. The council grew more sophisticated, establishing basic laws and processes for judgment. Disputes were settled by mediators, often wise elders or cunning negotiators trained in empathy and logic. Despite the successes, Varys knew better than most that utopias do not exist. Envy, greed, and resentment found their way in, as they always do. Factions emerged. Some people wanted expansion, to claim more territory on the island or beyond. Others demanded a stricter defense policy, fearing the day the Iron Throne or another power might try to claim them. Whispers of dissatisfaction occasionally reached Varys' ear. He tackled these issues head-on, using transparency as his greatest tool. Public forums were held where each faction could voice concerns and decisions were reached collectively. Over time, the settlement's morale remained largely positive. They had a unity born from shared hardship and the dream of a better life. Little by little, Haven's population soared to nearly 1,000 souls. Farms ringed the outskirts, producing enough surplus to trade for goods they could not craft themselves, like metal or for forging. As blacksmiths honed their craft, the settlement gained the capacity to produce weapons, tools, hinges, nails, and everything else needed for a growing society. When the first child born in Haven took their first steps, there was an unspoken sense that the settlement was no longer a mere experiment. It was real, alive. This child would never know the tyranny of distant kings or the heartbreak of war between great houses. This child would be a citizen of Haven, the first of many who would grow up believing that people could chart their own fate. One crisp morning, years after they first landed, Varys stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the harbor. He leaned on his staff. These days, he found he needed one for support. Jaren and Kaleo, now young men, stood beside him. Jaren had become one of Haven's most astute scouts, venturing into the uncharted corners of the island to map out resources and watch for threats. Kaleo, on the other hand, had taken to leading the militia, forging a style of leadership that combined compassion with preparedness. They gazed at the cluster of buildings below, the wooden houses, now flanked by new stone structures. Thick smoke rose from the smithy and fishing boats dotted the calm waters. The watchtower on the far end of the harbor kept vigil. Beyond the pier, they saw a ship approaching, sails full, likely bearing newcomers or supplies. Varys drew in a breath. He reflected on the path that had led him here, from the Red Keep's secret passages to this vantage point in a land unclaimed by any crown. He was older, yes, but had never felt more alive in purpose. Here was a place that belonged to the common folk. Not a perfect place, he would be the first to admit that, but a testament to what could be accomplished when people banded together for mutual good instead of tearing each other down in the name of thrones. Kaleo broke the silence. Sometimes I can't believe we built all this. Varys smiled. All of us built it. Not just me. Remember that. Jaren crossed his arms against the chill. You gave us the chance. Without your gold, your cunning, we might never have left King's Landing. True, Varys acknowledged. But gold alone is not enough to forge a society. Nor is cunning. It takes heart, which you and everyone else here have displayed in abundance. They watched as the ship docked. A handful of crew disembarked, along with several new settlers, families clutching bundles of clothes, hopeful expressions shining in their eyes as they took in haven for the first time. Even from a distance, Varys could see their relief, their cautious optimism. Another wave of arrivals seeking something better. The memory of the scheming courts of King's Landing, the brutality of war, and the flames of Dragonfire all felt far away, as if belonging to another world. Perhaps one day the rulers of Westeros would catch wind of Haven's existence and come seeking dominion. Or perhaps the realm's chaos would keep them occupied indefinitely. Varys did not fear that day, for Haven was not built on fear. If conflict came, they would face it together, guided not by the lust for power but by the common good. He turned to the two young men beside him. Go greet our new arrivals. Help them find quarters and introduce them to the council. Offer them comfort, for many have traveled far. They nodded and made their way down, leaving Varys alone. He lingered on the rocky bluff, the wind tugging at his robes. He felt neither a lord nor a commoner, but something in between, a caretaker of a dream. In the silence, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself for the realm. But he smiled, recalling the old phrase he once used to hint at the greater good. Now, the words carried a deeper meaning. This was his realm now, a realm without an Iron Throne, without dragons or tyrants, without the hunger for power that had consumed so many. A realm guided by the belief that people, given the chance, could govern themselves more justly than any king or queen. And it was growing, day by day, heartbeat by heartbeat. When Varys finally descended the path to Haven, he did so with measured steps, not hurried or furtive as he once had been in the labyrinth of the Red Keep. The settlement sprawled before him, alive with the bustle of daily chores, children laughing, blacksmiths pounding steel, fisherfolk unloading their catch. A group of settlers repaired a broken cart wheel while an elderly woman offered them water. In the council hall, a debate over a new farmland boundary had just concluded, everyone parting with handshakes instead of drawn swords. Yes, the place had its troubles, but it was theirs. It belonged to all who toiled and hoped within it. And at its heart stood a man who had once been called a spider, a eunuch, a master of secrets, a survivor of cruelty, a manipulator. Now he was just Varys, an aging advisor content to see others thrive. He had not founded a kingdom in the sense of titles and crowns, but something better, at least in his eyes. A refuge for the common folk, free from the old games that had claimed countless lives. And so the Master of Whisperers found his quiet victory not in toppling kings, but in giving the people a chance to rule themselves. In that moment, as the day's last golden rays warmed the settlement's roofs, Varys recognized that the greatest power he had ever wielded was not fear or secrets, but hope. Yet tranquility, like the gentlest breeze, can shift into a tempest with little warning. As the seasons turned and the settlement grew, the quiet rumor of Haven's existence became something more than whispered stories in docksides. Wandering minstrels composed ballads of a hidden land where peasants lived as free men and women, unbound by feudal oaths. Merchants abroad spoke of fair trading deals and the absence of extortionate taxes. Refugees whispered that a man named Varys, once the Master of Whisperers, had conjured a kingdom out of the cold sea. Gradually, such whispers found the ears of lords and ladies across Westeros, even as war continued to flare in pockets of the continent. Rebellions rose, new monarchs were crowned, and old grudges played out in the never-ending tapestry of betrayal and bloodshed. But with each shift in power, more common folk fled, seeking a fabled sanctuary. Ships set sail from White Harbor, Gulltown, even as far as Old Town, navigating treacherous seas and guided only by rumor. Not all made it to Haven's shores. Some were lost to storms, others to pirates. But those who arrived bore tales of heartbreak and hope. In this swirl of arrivals, some carried knowledge invaluable to the budding settlement. Healers from the Citadel who had grown tired of rigid traditions found their way to Haven, bringing advanced medical understanding. A handful of skilled smiths, driven out by guild politics and Essos, brought new techniques for forging stronger steel. A few literate scribes came, setting up a modest library in a large two-story building constructed near the council hall. And so Haven, once no more than a scattering of huts, became a hub of learning and innovation. Men and women who had little place in the old hierarchies discovered new life in a land that valued them for what they could contribute rather than whom they served by birth or station. Such prosperity could not remain untested. One late summer afternoon, 3 large ships appeared on the horizon. At first, the watchmen did not recognize their sigils. But as they drew closer, it became clear these were no merchant vessels. Their sails bore the device of a black stag on yellow, reminiscent of the Baratheon banner, albeit twisted, perhaps the mark of a minor cadet branch or a sworn bannerman. Indeed, as they anchored just outside the range of Haven's fledgling defenses, riders landed on the far beach, forming a column of some 40 armed men. They hoisted a makeshift banner, a sign that they came in parley. Word spread quickly through Haven. The council gathered in the main hall, joined by Varys, Kaelio, Jaren, and the militia captain. Tension coiled in the air. In the years since Haven's founding, there had been few direct confrontations with outside forces, besides that early band of marauders. Now an organized group, bearing the crest of a known house, had arrived. Possibly they came to trade or to negotiate alliances. Possibly they came to conquer. Varys's eyes narrowed. He had spent a lifetime reading men's intentions from subtle cues. Such an arrival, with 3 ships and a column of heavily armed men, spoke volumes. This was no courtesy call. The question was how best to respond. Discussions among the council members erupted. Some advocated for an immediate show of force, others for a welcoming approach, hoping to avoid bloodshed. After a lengthy debate, they agreed on caution but decided to meet the newcomers in a neutral space, a meadow near the outskirts of Haven. The militia would be present, but with weapons sheathed. They would present themselves as a community willing to negotiate rather than wage war, for that was the ethos of this new land. Thus, on a warm afternoon, Varys, flanked by Kaelio and the militia captain, approached the designated meadow where the foreign contingent awaited. A man with broad shoulders and a face lined by old scars rode forward. He wore dark plate armor chased with gold, and upon his cloak shimmered that variant stag sigil. He removed his helm, revealing close-cropped gray hair and eyes like stone. "Who speaks for the settlement?" he demanded, voice carrying easily across the quiet field. "I do," Varys replied, stepping forward, his calm demeanor belying the unease in his heart. "I am known as Varys." The man's eyes flickered with recognition. "The eunuch from King's Landing? The spider who once served Targaryens and Lannisters alike." "I served the realm," Varys answered evenly. "And I serve these people now. May I know your name?" "I am Ser Jothran Storbane," the man replied, as though it were a title of legend. "I come in the name of Lord Ellen Barroth, Warden of the Storm Coast." Kaelio, from behind Varys, whispered, "Warden of the Storm Coast? That's not an official title." But Varys silenced him with a subtle gesture. He turned back to Jothran. "And what brings you and your men to Haven's shores, Ser Jothran Stormbane?" The knight's gaze swept over the militia, noting their discipline but also their mismatched arms and armor. His lip curled slightly. "We have heard tales of a land unbound by fealty to any king or lord. Lord Ellen Barroth finds this curious. He would know the truth of it, and if your people are as prosperous as rumor claims, he would discuss terms." "Terms?" Varys echoed softly, though he already knew what that might entail. "We are willing to trade with any who come peacefully. As for fealty, we owe it to no one." Jothran's expression hardened. "All lands pay fealty to someone. If not a king, then a warlord or a group of lords. Your illusions of independence are but a bubble waiting to be burst. We are prepared to offer Lord Barroth's protection. In return, you will pay tribute like any other vassal and offer soldiers if called upon." A nervous ripple went through the Haven representatives, but Varys's voice remained steady. "We appreciate the offer, but we have no interest in becoming vassals. We have kept the peace here, built prosperity with our own hands. We do not seek protection from wars we did not start, nor do we wish to be drawn into them." Jothran's hand flexed on the hilt of his sword. "This is not a request, Spider. Lord Barroth will not tolerate a rival power growing unchecked near his domain." Varys's mind raced. Domain? This so-called Warden of the Storm Coast was over 1,000 leagues away from the Stormlands. Clearly, Lord Ellenbareth was an ambitious figure, perhaps a minor noble who had declared himself something greater in the chaos that followed the wars in Westeros. He was likely building his own power base, collecting tribute from smaller islands or coastal towns. Haven was ripe fruit for him, a thriving settlement with resources, farmland, and trade routes. The old spider recognized the shape of the game so familiar to him: intimidation, subjugation, the threat of force. But this time he would not yield. He said calmly, "We do not recognize Lord Bareth's claim. Let him come himself if he wishes to speak. But as you see, our settlement stands on its own." Joffrin smirked, cold as iron. "He may well come if you persist in your foolishness. I have seen enough to know you have made something impressive here. But your illusions will be shattered the moment real knights and real armies set foot on these shores." Varys maintained an unflappable mask. "Then send your message. We will not be bullied, but we are willing to discuss trade. If Lord Bareth sees sense, he may find us a valuable partner, not a vassal." A silence stretched. Joffrin surveyed the determined faces of Haven's militia. Though they were fewer in number than his men and less well-equipped, they stood resolute. No fear radiated from them, only resolve. Finally, Joffrin spat on the ground. "You court ruin, Spider. But I shall relay your words. If you change your mind, send word to the Storm Coast. For your sake, I hope you do." With that, he raised his helm and signaled his men to withdraw. They mounted their horses and rode back to the ships. Soon, the vessels unfurled their sails and disappeared beyond the horizon. In the aftermath, the council convened in urgency. Tension pervaded every corner of the hall, the timber walls reverberating with shouted worries and grim prognostications. Some wanted to fortify further, to double the militia, build more defenses. Others suggested seeking alliances with nearby powers to counter Lord Bareth's threatened aggression. Many looked to Varys for answers. He addressed them calmly. "We have always known that one day we might attract the attention of ambitious lords. Our best defense lies in unity and preparedness. We cannot, must not, surrender our ideals. If we bow to one lord, we become no different from the lands we left behind." A scrawny blacksmith spoke up from the back. "But what if they march on us with hundreds of knights? We have families, children. Will we let them be slaughtered for an ideal?" Varys inclined his head. "You are right to be concerned. Let us ensure we do all we can to protect ourselves. We have resources, trade alliances, walls that can be strengthened, new steel to forge arms. We can also prepare for a siege, store food and water. And if all else fails, we do have the option to parley. But not as vassals. Always remember that we stand for something different." Though fear lingered in the hall, they agreed on a plan of action: expand the fortifications, train more volunteers, and reach out to the settlement's scattered allies for support. The scribes wrote letters by lamplight that very night, dispatching envoys on swift ships to Bravos, Pentos, and even to certain sympathetic lords in the north who might favor an independent refuge over yet another petty tyrant. Haven braced itself. Over the next few months, a transformation took place. The walls, once a simple wooden palisade, were reinforced with stone, forming a more substantial perimeter around the core settlement. Arrow slits were integrated and wooden towers were built. The militia swelled with volunteers, farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, all determined to defend the only land they had ever found where they felt truly free. Training sessions took place at dawn and dusk. Hammers were swapped for swords, fishing nets for spears. Even the children sensed the shift in mood, playing at war games with wooden sticks, mimicking the more serious exercises of their elders. Trade still flowed, albeit under a cloud of tension. Newcomers continued to arrive, many with stories of the troubles on the mainland, of the ever-shifting alliances of lords, the latest round of bloodshed spurred by claimants to the Iron Throne. News came that King's Landing had fallen under yet another regime, but no one seemed to know who truly held power. None of it mattered to Haven except that chaos drove more people to their shores and might eventually drive warlords like Bareth to expand their domains even more aggressively. Varys oversaw these developments with a calm intensity. He delegated widely, trusting the settlement's leadership, men and women elected by the community. He himself focused on diplomacy. Messages flew across the seas, carrying warnings to potential allies and forging relationships with anyone who might stand in Bareth's way. Over time, replies came trickling in. A merchant prince of Bravos offered limited support, a promise to send 2 war galleys if Bareth threatened trade routes. A minor lord in the north, who had once known Varys from court, sent word that he sympathized but could not risk open conflict with a Baratheon pretender. Even so, such half-pledges might tip the balance should Haven be attacked. Meanwhile, Kaleo drilled the militia relentlessly, forging a cohesive defensive force. He had learned from old soldiers, picking up battlefield tactics and siege strategies. His own life in Flea Bottom and subsequent experiences had honed his cunning, but he tempered it now with a sense of duty to protect the vulnerable. Jaren, on the other hand, expanded Haven's intelligence network, quietly dispatching scouts to track any signs of Barrett's naval movements. If they sighted a fleet assembling on the Storm Coast, Haven would know. The months passed in uneasy peace until one fateful morning when a battered fishing boat limped into Haven's harbor. The fishermen aboard were near death, having outrun a fleet of warships that had fired upon them. They gasped out a single name, Barrett. Alarm bells rang across the settlement. The council convened at once. All eyes turned to Varys. He stood, face-etched in concern. "It seems our time has come," he said solemnly. "We must assume Lord Barrett intends to make good on his threats." Within hours, scouts were dispatched to watch the sea routes leading to Haven. Women and children were guided to secure shelters deeper inland, near the foothills of the island. The militia manned the walls and towers, readying longbows, crossbows, and spears. Arrows were fletched in haste, boiling oil was prepared in cauldrons, and blacksmiths hammered late into the night, forging last-minute swords and repairing armor. On the third day after the fishermen's dire warning, the watchtower bells rang out just after sunrise. A lookout at the highest vantage had spotted sails on the horizon, a dark line of ships, more than a dozen, bearing that twisted stag banner. They approached in a wide formation clearly designed for a siege. A hush fell over Haven as the armada drew nearer. From his vantage on the wall, Varys scanned the ships with a spyglass. He counted at least 15 war galleys, bristling with archers and siege weapons. An army of unknown size was likely on board. Behind him, Kaelio stood with the militia, quiet but resolute. "Your orders?" Kaelio asked softly. Varys lowered the spyglass. "We hold. We give them a chance to parley if they desire. If they attack, we defend ourselves to the last. We do not yield." As the war galleys closed in, they positioned themselves just outside arrow range. Several smaller boats were lowered, carrying heavily armed men toward the beach near the harbor. This time, no banner of parley was raised. Instead, the soldiers landed, formed ranks, and began marching directly toward Haven's walls. At the same time, the galleys launched flaming arrows into the skies, turning day into a terrifying tableau of fire and smoke. Kaelio roared instructions. The militia moved into position along the battlements, returning fire with arrows of their own. Sharpshooters aimed for officers, while others doused incoming projectiles with water or covered them with shields. The first clash came on the beaches, where a forward grow up of Haven's defenders met Barrett's troops in a desperate melee. Steel clanged on steel, and the screams of the dying filled the salt-tinged air. From the wall's vantage point, Varys watched with grim determination. The defenders fought fiercely, hearts aflame with a commitment to protect their home. Barrett's men were disciplined, but they seemed unprepared for the fervor of those defending not a lord's keep but their own families. Several of the invaders fell to well-placed arrows or cunning ambushes in the dunes. Yet they were numerous and more boats kept landing. The tide of the battle seemed poised to overwhelm Haven's outer positions. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the sea. Varys' spyglass revealed a new fleet emerging from behind a rocky outcropping. Braavosi war galleys, sleek and deadly, moving in perfect formation. They had come as promised, albeit in smaller numbers than Barrett's fleet, but they caught the attackers off guard. A pitched naval battle erupted off the coast. The thunder of ramming hulls and the crash of catapult stones echoed across the bay. On the beach, confusion reigned. Barrett's forces, caught between the unexpected Braavosi assault at sea and the determined defenders on land, faltered. A group of Haven archers targeted the officers who struggled to coordinate. The resulting chaos gave the militia precious moments to regroup. Kaelio led a charge from the gates, a band of volunteers surging forward with spears lowered. They crashed into Barrett's flank, scattering their formation. For hours, the battle swayed. The Braavosi galleys fought valiantly, sinking several of Barrett's ships and forcing others to retreat. Those that remained tried to bombard Haven from the sea, but the settlement's ballistae, constructed hastily in the preceding months, hurled stones and flaming tar back at them. Along the shore, the militia clashed repeatedly with wave after wave of invaders. The sand turned red with blood, and the brine in the air mingled with the metallic tang of war. Varys moved from post to post, encouraging defenders, helping triage the wounded, and offering strategic counsel to the militia leaders. Though not a warrior, his calm presence steadied many who might otherwise have fled. Jaren's scouts proved invaluable, guiding small squads around enemy lines, striking from the flanks, and vanishing into the dunes. This was not the kind of open warfare in which Bareth's troops excelled. It was guerrilla defense fueled by desperation and intimate knowledge of the terrain. As twilight approached, the invaders' momentum stalled. Their ships faced severe losses at sea, and the men on land were pinned down by unrelenting resistance. Ser Jothran Storbane was spotted in the thick of the fighting, his scarred face contorted with rage as he realized victory was slipping away. In a final, desperate push, he led a charge that broke through an outer gate of Haven only to be met by Kaleo and a knot of fierce defenders in the narrow streets, where numbers counted for less than grit and skill. The ensuing melee ended with Jothran unhorsed, wounded, and forced to retreat under the cover of his remaining men. Night fell, and the battered remnants of Bareth's force began a disorganized withdrawal, scrambling to their remaining ships. The beaches were littered with bodies, the surf foaming pink. Bareth's fleet, reduced by the Braavosi intervention, pulled back under darkness, leaving behind them a ruined stretch of shoreline and a grieving settlement. Haven had held, but at a heavy cost. When dawn came, the toll became clear. Scores of defenders lay dead, many more injured. Smoke lingered over the shore, and the once pristine sands were scarred with churned earth and wreckage. Yet despite the sorrow, a sense of awe permeated the survivors. They had fended off a trained force intent on subjugation. They had shown the world, or at least the portion of it that watched, that a free community united by choice rather than fealty could stand against a warlord. The Braavosi galleys sailed closer to the harbor, battered but victorious. Their captains came ashore, greeted by a weary Varys and the council. Brief celebrations ensued as the Braavosi were honored for their timely aid. Varys knew their motivations were not purely altruistic, they wanted to protect their trade interests. Yet for this day, their alliance had saved Haven from certain doom. Gifts were exchanged, promises of future cooperation renewed. Then the Braavosi ships departed, leaving Haven to nurse its wounds. In the aftermath, funerals were held. Wooden pyres lined the coastline, sending the departed off with flames that shimmered against the morning sky. Tears were shed for fallen friends, neighbors, and loved ones. The healers worked tirelessly in makeshift infirmaries, tending to the wounded, some of whom would carry scars or disabilities for life. The settlement mourned, yet also felt a profound sense of pride. They had defended their home, their way of life, their dream of a better society. Varys walked among the people, offering condolences and listening to grief. He understood that the wounds were not only physical but also emotional. Haven's innocence had been shattered. No longer could they believe themselves hidden from the world's cruelty. Still, they endured. Kaleo, battered and bruised, emerged as a hero in the eyes of many, as did Jaren with his tireless scouting. But both took little comfort in the hero's mantle, haunted by the sights and sounds of the slaughter. In a council meeting a week after the battle, the discussion turned to the future. Some advocated for an offensive, striking Bareth's holdings preemptively to prevent another invasion. Others insisted on building even stronger defenses, turning Haven into a fortress. But Varys reminded them that they were not conquerors. To sail off and burn villages that may or may not be under Bareth's sway would turn them into the very force they despised. Ultimately, a middle path was chosen. Haven would remain vigilant, continuing to improve its fortifications and militia training. Diplomacy with allies would be strengthened, ensuring that if Bareth or anyone else attacked again, they would face not just Haven but a coalition of forces who found value in an independent haven of free people. Envoys were dispatched to gather intelligence on Bareth's next moves, ensuring the settlement would never be caught unawares again. Months rolled onward, and slowly the settlement healed. Crops were replanted in trampled fields, houses repaired, defenses refined. Children who had lost parents were adopted by neighbors or friends, an act of communal care that transcended blood ties. As the seasons shifted, the memory of the invasion hardened into a lesson. Freedom must be defended, often at great cost. Varys, for his part, was deeply changed by the ordeal. He found himself weighed by the knowledge that to build something pure in a world so tarnished by power struggles was to invite strife. Yet the people's resilience emboldened him. When he walked through Haven, he saw men and women forging anew, raising families, reading by lantern light in the library, or simply laughing around a communal fire. All the illusions of the old world, birthright, titles, ancient grudges, had no place here. Each passing day proved that a society built on mutual respect, though imperfect, could stand strong. And so Varys continued to serve, listening to the whispers of the realm as he always had, but this time in the open, for the good of a people who had chosen him, chosen themselves to be free. Late one evening, as autumn leaves fell in vibrant hues around the settlement, Varys found himself atop the newly rebuilt watchtower. The sea stretched out in all directions, a dark canvas under a moonlit sky. He leaned on the parapet, feeling the cool wind. His joints ached, a reminder of his advancing years. He recalled the words he once told Tyrion Lannister, "Power resides where men believe it resides." Here in Haven, power resided in the will of the people, in their collective resolve to carve out a different destiny. He closed his eyes, remembering a time when he believed the Game of Thrones was inevitable, an endless cycle of violence and betrayal. Now he realized he had proven otherwise, even if only in one remote corner of the vast world. Whatever storms the future held, Varys knew Haven would face them together. And in that unity he found solace. A faint smile touched his lips as he gazed at the stars, thinking of how far he had come from the spider's nest of King's Landing. No iron throne loomed here, no great lords to appease, only the steady hum of work, the warmth of fellowship, and the shared hope that had turned a dream into reality. That hope, he thought, was worth all the battles to come. Nights in Haven had grown calmer since the final embers of the funeral pyres died down. Yet the sting of the recent battle remained. The people were quieter now, less prone to the easy laughter that once roamed free through the harbor. Yet work continued unabated. Walls still needed mending. Farmland needed sowing. The scars on the beach had been partially obscured by shifting tides, but everyone who lived there remembered too well the sight of blood on wet sand. Varys, sitting late one evening in the small chamber that served as his personal quarters, reflected on how swiftly Haven had been forced to defend its ideals with blood. He was not naive. He had always known there would be challenges, but part of him had hoped they would remain rumors. Distant lords or pirates who might never learn of this fledgling refuge. Yet Lord Ellen Barrett had arrived like a hammer, testing the very soul of the settlement. He stood and crossed to a narrow window. A crisp autumn wind crept through the thin glass, carrying with it the scent of pine and salt. He recalled a conversation from years ago, back in King's Landing, when Tyrion had once asked if Varys truly believed common folk could rule themselves. Varys had not answered directly then, preferring to let Tyrion unravel the puzzle. Now, seeing these men and women, peasants turned defenders, refused to bow to a petty warlord, he found his answer in their unity. They did not need the illusions of a lord's benevolence or the looming dread of a monarch's wrath to forge courage. Their bravery came from love for their families, neighbors, and the land they had built with their own hands. He closed the shutters and lit a small lamp, settling at a wooden table piled with scrolls, letters, and small missives from across the seas. A new dispatch from Braavos had arrived that morning, praising Haven's courage and proposing a deeper alliance. Varys wondered at the Braavosi captain's sincerity. They were known for their business acumen, and likely they saw in Haven a valuable trade partner. But cynicism aside, alliances might be the only bulwark against future invasions. He set the letter aside to discuss with the council in the coming days. Word had also come from scattered islands along the Shivering Sea, places that had nominally sworn themselves to some half-forgotten house or petty tyrant. Some of these communities apparently resented Barrett's attempt at expansion. Possibly they could be convinced to enter a loose confederation with Haven, trading resources, intelligence, and mutual defense. That, too, would require delicate negotiation. A soft rap at the door broke his concentration. At his invitation, Jaren entered, face shadowed by the dim lamplight. His youthful features bore new lines of worry, and his eyes no longer carried the unbridled wonder of a street urchin turned traveler. "Lord Varys," he said, an old habit. Varys had tried to dispel such formalities, but some lingered. "Captain Merrick's ship has docked again. He brings cargo and someone who wishes to speak with you." Varys arched an eyebrow. "Someone important?" "Could be." Jaren shrugged. "She won't give her name, but she paid Merrick handsomely to bring her here. Says she's from across the narrow sea, though she has a Westerosi accent." Varys rose. "I'll see her then. Better she speak to me directly than wander about raising suspicions." Before leaving, he slipped on a heavier robe and tucked a small dagger into his belt. Though he rarely needed it, old habits of caution died hard. Jaren led him out into the night, which was pleasantly cool. Torches lit the settlement's main thoroughfare, and the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer spoke of repairs that never ceased. They found the mysterious arrival waiting in the council hall, a cavernous structure built of local timber with stone pillars fortifying its corners. A few militia members lingered inside to keep watch. At first glance, the visitor looked like any foreign traveler, a lean figure in a hooded cloak of dark blue wool, face partially obscured by the shadows. But when she turned, Varys detected the refined posture of someone trained to carry themselves with authority. She cast back her hood, revealing honey-blonde hair coiled in braids. Lines of weariness traced her brow, and her eyes glinted with some unspoken intensity. Varys inclined his head in greeting. "Welcome to Haven." She studied him for a moment. "The rumors don't lie then. The spider is alive and well, building a little paradise on an island the world barely knows." He recognized that accent, northern with a faint attempt to bury it. "I prefer to say we are building a refuge for those who want to live free of endless wars. But you did not make this journey simply to observe. How may we help you?" She hesitated. "The name is Miranda, though that might not mean much to you." He made a polite gesture for her to continue. In truth, he had never heard of a Miranda with such a bearing. But he would not dismiss the possibility she used an alias. "You can help me by letting me stay," she said at last. "I was a lady's maid once to a highborn family in the north. They lost everything. I fled when my mistress was murdered in one of the petty feuds that tear our land apart. I've no taste for lords and their squabbles anymore." Varys studied her closely. She did not tremble or look away. There was a quiet steel in her bearing. "And you've come alone? No family to speak of?" A flicker of pain crossed her features. "All gone," she said softly. "I heard tales of this place from a Braavosi trader. Said you were building something different." Varys felt a familiar chord of empathy. He had known many whose entire lives had been ground to dust by the feuds of great houses. "We welcome those who come in peace," he said. "But know that Haven is not so different as to be free of hardship. You'll work, contribute, defend this land if you must. We have no luxuries to offer." She nodded firmly. "I have skills. I can spin wool and mend clothing. I can run a household if need be. I don't expect an easy life, only a fair one." Varys believed her sincerity. The eyes rarely lied, and hers spoke of exhaustion and determination in equal measure. He gestured to Jaren. "Show Miranda to the guest quarters near the hall. In the morning, she can meet with the council to see where her abilities are best suited." A faint smile flickered on her lips. "Thank you," she said, then allowed Jaren to guide her away. Varys lingered in the hall after they left, exhaling slowly. Another refugee, another soul seeking sanctuary. It was what Haven was meant for, yet he always felt a tremor of caution. Anyone could carry secrets, his entire life had proven that. He silently resolved to learn more about Miranda. He would not pry, not immediately, but quiet observation might reveal if she posed any risk. As the next day dawned, a muted bustle filled the settlement. Wind teased the rooftops, carrying the smell of the sea inland. Fishing boats departed at first light, lines of folk tramped out to farmland or the stone quarry. The blacksmith's forge glowed again with fresh coals, and the council prepared for its daily session. In that council, the newly arrived Miranda stood quietly off to one side, watching as the representatives, farmers, fishers, healers, spoke with calm deliberation about everything from the rationing of salt to the need for a new midwife. When she was introduced, she answered questions plainly, describing the skill sets she had honed in her old life. The council concluded she might be best placed in the weaving and textile group, with part-time duties assisting in the communal kitchens. Miranda accepted without complaint. Soon after, a neighbor took her in, sharing a small house near the orchard. The arrangement seemed ordinary enough, though Jaren noticed how Miranda's eyes lingered on Varys with curiosity. In the weeks that followed, autumn deepened its hold on Haven. The leaves on the hardwoods flared gold and red, the conifers remained steadfastly green, and a chill wind suggested winter would not be gentle. Harvest time came early in these latitudes, and the fields yielded a modest but respectable crop of root vegetables, barley, and winter wheat. The newly expanded farmland, though rocky, began to show promise. Carpenters hurried to insulate houses with thick planks and heavy firs, preparing for the coming cold. Varys oversaw the distribution of surplus produce, ensuring that families of the fallen militia members received more than enough to tide them through winter. This was a small but crucial gesture designed to show that Haven remembered those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. It would also guard against bitterness or resentment among the grieving. Kaleo continued training the militia, albeit at a less frantic pace now that the immediate threat had passed. One morning, Varys watched the practice drills from atop the wall, a distant memory stirring. He recalled the Unsullied, how disciplined they were, but they fought for coin. Here, these defenders fought for their own freedom. He wondered if, in a direct comparison, devotion to one's own community would outmatch any paid soldier. no matter how disciplined. Gradually, Varys discovered small details about Miranda as she integrated into the daily life of Haven. She was adept at more than weaving. She seemed to speak several languages passably, an odd skill set for a mere lady's maid. Over time, she formed friendships, listened to local gossip, and occasionally visited the library to read. Jaren, discreet as ever, reported that she asked more questions than most newcomers. She was curious about the prior conflict with Bareth, the trade alliances, the council structure. None of it was incriminating, but Varys remained watchful. At length, the day came when Miranda approached him directly, catching him alone near the orchard. The trees there bore late apples, small and tart, perfect for winter storage. Varys was sampling one such apple with mild interest when she bowed her head in greeting. "Lord Varys," she said, and at his pointed glance, she corrected herself. "Forgive me, Varys." He gave a gracious nod. "How are you finding our humble settlement?" "It's not at all what I expected. Everyone has a say in how things run. People listen to me in the council sessions, even though I've only been here a short while." "That is our way," Varys said. "Voices matter more than titles." She was quiet, twisting a fallen leaf between her fingers. "I have a confession. I wasn't just a lady's maid. I was an informant of sorts, passing letters between my mistress and certain factions in the north. She believed in forging alliances that never quite materialized. I took messages back and forth, learned things I shouldn't have." Varys's expression remained serene, though her admission intrigued him. "And you fled when your mistress was killed, lest you face the same fate for what you knew?" Miranda nodded. "Yes, I had nowhere else to go. When I heard rumors of your settlement, I wondered if it might be a place where secrets wouldn't be used as currency to destroy people, or if I might find a second chance." "Everyone who arrives is seeking a second chance," Varys said gently. "You're free of your old obligations here, if that's what you desire." Her gaze searched his face. "Part of me wonders if you have use for someone with a knack for listening unseen or passing messages discreetly. I suspect you keep an ear to the winds of Westeros and beyond." Varys gave a small chuckle. "Once a spider, always a spider, is that it? I do maintain contact with a few acquaintances. Information can save us from threats. But Haven is not King's Landing. We don't spin webs to entrap. Our focus is survival and growth." She considered that. "I understand. Still, if you need someone who can travel or gather intelligence, I'm volunteering." Varys appreciated the directness. "I'll keep that in mind," he answered. "For now, you serve best by strengthening the settlement's industries. But if ever a need arises, I will remember your offer." A faint smile curved her lips. "Thank you, truly." And with that, she turned and departed, leaving Varys to chew the last of his apple in thoughtful silence. Winter loomed. Days shortened. Nights stretched. Snow fell earlier than expected, dusting the settlement in white. Children found delight in the drifts, while fishermen cursed the ice along the shallows. The militia patrolled the walls more frequently, half to watch for external threats and half to discourage wolf packs that sometimes prowled too close. Storehouses were stocked with salted fish, dried vegetables, and smoked meats in preparation for months of scarce hunting. As the snows deepened, new arrivals slowed to a trickle. Fewer ships braved the turbulent seas. The settlement's sense of community swelled in this season of forced closeness. Neighbors shared hearth fires, reading by lantern light or telling stories to pass the cold hours. Some nights, Varys roamed from house to house, dispensing small bits of cheer, a well-placed compliment on a home's craftsmanship, an anecdote from the old courts to amuse wide-eyed listeners. He found it surprisingly easy to connect with people when the goal was comfort rather than manipulation. Despite the outward calm, the memory of Bareth's attack had not faded. The council still debated whether another assault might come in spring or summer, when sailing was safer. Scouts occasionally returned from forays toward the storm coast, reporting that Bareth licked his wounds in a stronghold by the sea. One rumor suggested he was forging alliances with roving warbands. Another rumor contradicted it entirely, claiming Bareth had turned to raiding lesser islands to replenish his coffers. Varys concluded that the man would not soon forget Haven's defiance. Eventually, he might try again. The question became whether Haven should strike first. Several council members, including the blacksmith who had once questioned letting families suffer for an ideal, insisted they could not wait to be attacked again. Yet others, mindful of Haven's founding principle, peaceful refuge, resisted calls for open warfare. After heated debate, the council decided to keep to a defensive posture but intensify intelligence gathering. If Bareth made ready for war, they would know in time to prepare or launch a preemptive strike on his ships. In the library, Miranda assisted with organizing letters and messages from various sources, Braavos, Pentos, the North, and even Dorne. She took to the task with enthusiasm, devouring the knowledge contained in old texts about everything from advanced horticulture to rudimentary laws used in Essos city-states. Seeing her dedication, Varys gave her a small measure of trust, allowing her to read certain non-sensitive communications. Her ability to parse cryptic references made her a valuable resource. Now and again, she would discreetly pass him a note, a coded line from a Braavosi contact, or an overheard rumor from a new arrival at the docks. As the icebound winter weeks crept by, Varys mulled an idea. Haven was strong enough to fend off opportunistic raiders, but if a truly large force besieged them, they might falter. The Braavosi had come to their aid once, but that was far from guaranteed to happen again, unless Haven became indispensable to the Braavosi trade network. One frigid evening, he summoned Captain Merrick and a handful of experienced sailors to the council hall's side chamber. Kaleo also joined, along with Jaren, who had the best grasp of seafaring routes from his many scouting missions. Over mulled wine, they discussed a daring proposal: expand Haven's fleet, not just for fishing or local transport, but to offer escort services for merchant vessels traveling the Shivering Sea. Captain Merrick stroked his beard thoughtfully. Escort services? We'd need ships outfitted for battle more than we have, and crews trained to handle corsairs or storms. Varys nodded. Yes, and that requires coin. Coin we can partially raise by forging tighter agreements with Braavos. They have merchant ships that sail to unorthodox ports, carrying spices, silks, precious gems. If we can protect their ships from pirates, the Braavosi might see Haven as a bulwark. They'd anchor more trade here, perhaps even invest in fortifying our defenses. Then, if Bareth or anyone else tries to blockade us, Braavos might intervene again. Kaleo tapped the table. We'd be painting a target on ourselves, though. Escorting merchant ships is risky. We could lose men and vessels in storms or battles. And if we're too successful, other pirate lords might see us as a threat. That's a possibility, Varys allowed. But we cannot remain hidden any longer. The assault by Bareth has already announced our presence to those with ears. If the settlement is to thrive, we must be proactive. Merrick exhaled, glancing at Jaren. We'd need a proper shipyard. Our old docks aren't enough for building war galleys. Also, we'd need skilled shipwrights, maybe from the north or the Free Cities. Jaren spoke up. I know a pair of talented carpenters who arrived from the Riverlands last year. They might not be master shipwrights, but they're quick learners. If we can find one or two masters, the rest can help. As for materials, we have timber on the island, though it's mostly conifers. We'd need some hardwood shipments for keel work. Varys steepled his fingers. We can arrange that. I've contacts in White Harbor who owe me a favor. The Manderleys still command a fine shipping tradition, or at least they once did. If we pay well, perhaps we can coax a small group of skilled shipwrights to Haven under the radar, of course. After hours of discussion, they agreed to proceed with caution. The plan would begin by sending Captain Merrick to Braavos with a formal proposal. If the Braavosi responded favorably, Haven would invest in building or refitting several ships specifically for escort duty. The militia would also train additional Marines who could fight at sea. Days lengthened into weeks, and the seeds of that plan were set in motion. Captain Merrick departed, braving the winter seas. The blacksmiths hammered out nails and fittings for future vessels. Word spread discreetly among the settlement's inhabitants that a new venture was underway. Some bristled at the risk, but others saw opportunity. Miranda took careful note of the mood shifts, reporting mild anxieties but no serious dissent. One snowy afternoon, Jaren returned from a scouting expedition near the northern reaches of the island. He sought out Varys immediately, concern etched in his features. "We found tracks, large groups. Not human wolves, maybe. But it's strange. They don't hunt in such big packs unless resources are scarce. This winter might be pushing them south." Varys frowned. "We can handle a few wolves, but if the pack is large enough, it could threaten outlying farms." "More than large enough," Jaren said grimly. "I saw at least 20 sets of prints, maybe more. They'd eaten a deer clean and scattered the carcass across a wide area. Our farmland is a short trek from there." They wasted no time. Kaleo mustered the militia in the courtyard, explaining the situation. Volunteers split into teams to patrol the boundary between the farmland and the forest, building rudimentary watchfires that could scare away predators in the night. Some farmers moved their livestock closer to the settlement walls for safety. On the third night of these watch patrols, a sentry's horn shattered the stillness. Wolves had been sighted creeping through the snow-laden trees toward a barn. By the time the militia arrived, the wolves had already killed 2 goats. But the largest of the wolves, a hulking gray beast, lingered, snarling at the cluster of humans who arrived with torches and spears. Its eyes glowed in the flickering light, and for a moment Varys, who had hurried to the scene, glimpsed an eerie intelligence behind those eyes. Then an arrow from a watchman's bow found its mark, and the wolf collapsed with a muffled yelp. The pack scattered, howling into the darkness. The next morning, Kaleo organized hunting parties to track and drive off or kill the wolves. It was a grim task, but necessary. Over the following week, they harried the animals, forcing them northward and away from settled areas. A few militia members were injured, but no more livestock was lost. Still, the incident reminded everyone that the island itself held dangers beyond human foes. In the midst of these minor crises, Myranda slipped further into Varys' sphere of trust. She proved adept at picking up stray remarks from travelers, gleaning tidbits about external politics that others dismissed as unimportant. One day, she presented him with a short letter, Isolite. "This came from a merchant just arrived from Gulltown," she said. "It mentions that House Grafton is dealing with an outbreak of some sickness and refugees are sailing away in droves, some even heading this direction. But there's a curious note about gold shipments. Apparently a portion of those shipments is intended for someone called the Warden of the Storm Coast. That must be Bareth, or so I suspect." Varys scanned the note, his heartbeat steady. It appears Bareth is still collecting funds from any source he can. That suggests he might be rebuilding or recruiting. "Good work, Myranda." She looked quietly pleased. "I only pass on what I find." "Never underestimate the power of a single piece of intelligence," Varys murmured, recalling his old mantra from King's Landing. "It can shift the course of events." Winter's hold finally began to thaw. Icicles dripped from the rooftops and the late sun lingered longer each evening. Mud replaced snow, making travel messy but possible. That was when Captain Merrick's ship returned, battered by storms but bearing news from Braavos. The captain arrived at the council hall with a jubilant smile. "We have an agreement," he announced to the gathered representatives. "The Braavosi Merchant Consortium is willing to partner with us. They'll provide coin and some shipwrights, plus a supply of hardwood from Essos. In return, we must commit to escorting their vessels through these waters once we have our own fleet. They'll also maintain a small presence here, an office, they call it, to oversee operations." A low murmur spread through the council. The older farmer, who typically worried over newfangled ideas, raised his voice. "An office of foreign merchants? Will that not give Braavos too much foothold here?" Varys answered calmly, "We must be cautious. Braavos is known for its love of contracts and investments. But they are also the freest of the free cities, with no king or queen. They favor coin over conquest, which suits our needs better than a warlike ally. If we manage this carefully, it could bolster Haven's security. And if they station galleys here, that's effectively a deterrent to any future invasions." Another council member, a fisherman, asked about the cost. Captain Merrick produced a parchment listing terms. Haven would provide a modest share of profits from each escorted voyage, plus guaranteed docking privileges. The Braavosi also wanted the option to purchase local goods, timber, furs, fish at fixed prices. None of it sounded extortionate, though it was certainly more complex than Haven's usual straightforward trades. After deliberation, the council voted in favor of the pact. The following days buzzed with activity. Workers cleared space near the wharf to accommodate a proper shipyard. The news spread quickly through the settlement, igniting fresh hope. Haven would soon have its own small navy, or at least enough ships to defend and earn coin. Jobs multiplied, from carpenters to rope makers, and the once-idle winter laborers found themselves busy with preparations. The first Braavosi shipwrights arrived a few weeks later, bringing specialized tools and a stoic sense of purpose. They wasted no time taking stock of the timber supply, the existing docks, and potential sites for slipways. Their leader was a man named Alestro, short and stocky, with hands calloused from a lifetime of shaping wood. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were decisive. Under his direction, the foundations of a shipyard took shape at a speed that surprised even Captain Merrick. In that same season, more refugees trickled in, some from Gulltown, others from the Riverlands, claiming they'd heard rumors of a safe harbor far to the north. Many arrived hungry and half-frozen, having made the perilous journey with scant supplies. Haven extended what hospitality it could, though it strained the food reserves. The council re-examined rations and farmland usage, spurring a drive to clear more arable land once the ground thawed properly. A few among the new arrivals expressed dismay at being asked to work in the fields or build roads, having expected a land of idleness. But they soon learned that in Haven everyone toiled for the collective good. As spring edged into summer, the island awoke in full bloom. The maritime pines glistened with new sap, the orchard trees blossomed with delicate white and pink petals, and the farmland rolled out a tapestry of green shoots. A sense of guarded optimism infused the settlement. The first hull frames for a new escort galley rose on the slipway, skeletal arcs of carefully shaped wood. Miranda helped scribes in the library keep record of each plank and iron fitting, ensuring not a single nail was squandered. One bright morning, Jaren approached Varys in the bustling courtyard. "We've had word from a contact in Pentos," he said, voice low. "They claim a Sellsword company that once served Bareth is now in disarray. Their commander was killed and half the company deserted. This might mean Bareth is losing some muscle." Varys nodded thoughtfully. Good news, if true. Bareth's resources might be dwindling. Still, he remains a threat. A cornered animal is sometimes the most dangerous. Haven's leadership did not relax its vigilance. Kaleo redoubled the militia's drills. Scouts continued to patrol the seas around the island, watching for unfamiliar sails. Every few days, a Braavosi ship would arrive with more materials, or a merchant vessel would stop by to discuss future escort routes. The settlement's small harbor evolved into a lively scene of hammering, shouting, and seagulls circling overhead in search of scraps. In the midst of this expansion, tensions flickered closer to home. Some longtime residents resented the influx of new settlers, worried that the population was growing faster than the land and resources could sustain. Occasional squabbles broke out over property lines or fishing spots. The council was forced to mediate more disputes than ever before. In one heated session, two farmers nearly came to blows over who had the right to water from a certain creek. Varys stepped in, reminding them both that the communal good outweighed personal claims. Ultimately, the council devised a schedule. Each farm would draw water on allotted days, with a shared pool for emergencies. Though rudimentary, such measures helped keep the peace. Late that summer, the moment everyone had waited for finally arrived, the launching of the first of Haven's new escort galleys. It was not a grand warship, but it was sturdy and well-crafted, boasting a reinforced prow and room for archers along the sides. They named it the Free Current, a nod to Haven's spirit of independence. The entire settlement gathered at the water's edge to witness the launch. Children giggled as they perched on fence rails, while elders watched with tears in their eyes, perhaps remembering the settlement's humble beginnings. Alestro, the Braavosi shipwright, oversaw the final checks, then signaled for the hull to be released down the greased timbers. With creaks and groans, the galley slid into the harbor amid cheers and shouts of triumph. Torches flared, and the new sails died with a simple pattern of interlocking waves unfurled to a gentle breeze. That night, the celebration continued around bonfires. Musicians played flutes and drums, dancers twirled on the sandy shore, and ale flowed freely. Varys sat near the largest fire, quietly soaking in the joy. Kaleo laughed with his militia friends, and Jaren regaled a circle of wide-eyed children with tales of earlier adventures. Miranda, for her part, seemed momentarily free of her cautious reserve, smiling as she tasted spiced wine. When the festivities began to die down, Miranda made her way toward Varys. He could see the flicker of the flames dancing in her eyes. "A grand day," she said, her tone warm but subdued. Varys nodded, gazing at the newly launched galley bobbing at its moorings. "The first step toward ensuring we aren't so easily threatened again. I hope we can stave off further bloodshed." She looked at the bonfire, then lowered her voice. "Do you really believe that, though? So long as we stand apart from the rest of Westeros, they'll see us as an oddity, maybe even a menace to their power. Bareth is only the first. There could be others. Perhaps," Varys conceded. "But each day we endure is a victory. Each time we secure a ship or form an alliance, we strengthen our position. And maybe we show others there's a different path. Miranda studied him with a faint smile. No wonder you managed to survive so many kings and queens. You have a knack for believing in possibilities others don't. He shrugged, humility in his expression. I've been called many things in my life, opportunist, manipulator, the spider, but here, I found a chance to use my old skills for something more enduring than intrigues. She nodded, looking out at the dark horizon. Maybe that's why I feel renewed here. I spent so much time living in shadows, passing messages, conspiring. It's strange to see how knowledge can be a force for unity, not just division. He gave a thin smile, rising from the log on which he perched. Rest well, Miranda. Tomorrow we start building the second galley. The waves won't wait. In the following weeks, the Free Current embarked on a test voyage, escorting a Braavosi merchant ship to a neighboring island. The mission succeeded without conflict, and though no pirates threatened them, the knowledge that they had an armed escort heartened the merchants. A small share of profit from that voyage went into Haven's coffers, helping to finance the next ship's construction. All the while, Captain Merrick took command of the Free Current, training a crew of dedicated Rhinas turned guards. They drilled in naval combat tactics, archers firing from the deck, spearmen repelling boarders, oarsmen practicing disciplined maneuvers. It wasn't the skill of the royal fleet nor the might of Daenerys Targaryen's former armada, but it was a start. With prosperity came new challenges. Temporary shelters in Haven swelled with arrivals. The council faced the pressing need to either expand the settlement's boundaries or build entirely new villages on the island. A faction of younger settlers, led by an outspoken carpenter named Joss, argued for founding a second settlement on the island's western shore, near a sheltered cove suitable for another harbor. But older residents worried about overextending their defenses. A protracted debate ended in a compromise. A scouting party would thoroughly map the western shore to assess farmland, resources, and defensibility. If the area was deemed viable, a small colony of volunteers could break ground there, with the militia rotating patrols. The move would also create a fallback point if Haven's main settlement ever faced a sustained siege. So, armed with provisions, Jaren, Joss, and a band of about 20 others set off for the western side of the island. They carried axes, tents, and a hopeful spark in their hearts. Miranda nearly volunteered to join them, but Varys asked her to remain. Her talents were more crucial in gathering external intelligence. She agreed, albeit reluctantly. Days passed with no word from the expedition. That was not entirely surprising, as the terrain was rugged and they likely needed time to survey. On the 10th day, a runner arrived. Exhausted, he stumbled into Haven with a torn cloak and scratches across his face. He gasped out that the expedition had been attacked by unknown assailants, not Bareth's men and not mere bandits. They wore mismatched gear, some bearing insignias that Jaren recognized from Essos Cell's word companies. They had surprised the scouts in a rocky pass, killing 3 and wounding several more, then vanished without explanation. Alarm spread through Haven. Had Bareth hired mercenaries to lurk on the island? Or were these Cell's words acting independently, seeing a chance to raid new lands? Varys convened the council. Kaelios suggested sending a strong militia force to sweep the western shore and drive out any hostile presence. Others feared leaving the main settlement underdefended. In the end, a compromise was reached. 50 militia volunteers marched west under Kaelios' command. They would rescue the survivors and ascertain the nature of the threat. Meanwhile, the rest of Haven braced for any signs of infiltration closer to home. Miranda, heart-pounding, asked Varys for permission to accompany the rescue party, citing her knowledge of stealth and infiltration. At first he hesitated, but she was adamant that her skills might make the difference. Finally, he agreed, giving her a small token. A medallion shaped like an open ear, a playful nod to her role as a discreet listener. "Keep your ears sharp," he told her, voice low. "If these attackers are professional, we need every advantage we can get." That evening, as Miranda joined Kaelios' force, Varys stood on the ramparts, watching the column of torches snake away into the twilight. A chill wind brushed his cheeks. Despite all the progress they had made, alliances, a nascent navy, new farmland, danger still lurked. Perhaps it always would. He spent a sleepless night drifting between watch posts, offering encouragement to the militia and ensuring the walls were secure. Before dawn, he finally retreated to his chambers, where he found Jaren waiting, face taut with worry. "I should have gone with them," Jaren said. I know the terrain better than most. You were injured in the initial attack, Varys reminded him. We need your scouting prowess, but not at the cost of your health. Jaren lowered his gaze. If something happens to Kaleo or Miranda, we must trust in their abilities, Varys said, voice gentle, and prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. 2 days later, a runner returned from Kaleo's force. The news was mixed. They had found the attackers' camp, a hidden hollow near the western coast, guarded by a natural wall of boulders. A brief skirmish ensued. The militia drove out the mercenaries, killing some and capturing 2. One of Haven's men was lost and several wounded, including Miranda, who took an arrow to the shoulder. But the mercenaries fled inland, fracturing into smaller bands. Kaleo's message suggested that these sellswords might be exiles from Essos with no specific allegiance, drawn here by rumors of easy plunder. They had stockpiled small loot from wrecked ships and hidden caches. Now they were scattered, but still dangerous. Varys grimaced upon hearing of Miranda's injury. The runner assured him it was not mortal, the arrow had passed cleanly through muscle and the healers in the party had patched her up. Still, it was a sobering reminder that Haven's expansion was not unopposed, even the island itself contained threats they had yet to discover. That evening, a subdued hush settled over the settlement as people absorbed the news. Some questioned the wisdom of trying to found a second colony. Others insisted the island needed to be tamed or they would forever be vulnerable to hidden foes. The council decided to hold off on establishing a permanent settlement in the west until a more thorough clearing operation could be carried out. When Kaleo's force finally returned, weary and bandaged, they brought with them 2 bound mercenary prisoners. One was a wiry man with a shaved head and a savage scar across his jaw, the other a woman with piercing eyes and Essosi tattoos. They were housed under guard in an unused storeroom while the council deliberated their fate. The question loomed. What was Haven's policy on prisoners of war or criminals who threatened their land? The earlier decision to offer redemption to the bandits who had attacked them years ago had set a precedent, but these mercenaries seemed far more ruthless. Miranda, arm in a sling, attended the council session at which the prisoners were questioned. She had insisted on being there despite her injury. Varys watched her from across the room, impressed by her resolve. Kaleo, too, looked worn, but he spoke clearly about how the mercenaries had fought with disciplined brutality, suggesting they were trained in Essos. The prisoners refused to reveal much, sneering at the notion of answering to peasants. They made it plain they had no loyalty to Bareth or any known lord. They followed coin, and the rumor was that hidden riches awaited on this island, so they had come to take what they could. When pressed on where they heard such rumors, they clammed up or spat curses. In a tense vote, the council decided on a second chance for those who had not committed murder, just as they had done with the earlier band of sellswords. The male prisoner, believed to have killed at least one of Haven's men, was sentenced to death. The woman would be given a choice: renounce violence and labor for the community, or face execution. She accepted the offer, though her eyes burned with resentment. That evening, Haven conducted its second execution in its short history. The man went to the block unrepentant, cursing Haven's naive dream right up until the axe fell. Some in the crowd turned away, others watched in grim silence. Though the settlement prided itself on mercy, they had no illusions about the world's cruel edges. Within days of that event, Miranda sought out Varys. They walked along the parapets in the glow of early morning, the sea breeze riffling their cloaks. She winced occasionally, favoring her injured shoulder. Was it the right choice? She asked quietly, staring at the foam-flecked waves. To execute him? Varys's expression was somber. The council decided. I agreed with them. A man who murders and refuses to repent leaves no path for redemption. Mercy can't be forced upon one who despises it. She nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her features. The line between justice and cruelty is thinner than I thought. Even here. Haven is not a utopia, he said gently. We strive for fairness, but we live in a harsh reality. We can't allow murderers free rein. Every society must protect itself. She let out a long breath. I know. I just hoped that this place might be free of such darkness. Darkness exists everywhere, Varys replied. We can only decide how we face it, how we rise above it. She met his gaze, a silent question in her eyes. Perhaps she wondered if he, the famed spider, had faced his own darkness. But she did not ask. Instead, she rested her good hand on the stone parapet and turned her face to the wind. Summer neared its zenith and Haven pulsed with life. The second escort galley, christened the Shield of the Tides, slid into the water with fewer festivities but equal pride. Braavosi ships came and went regularly now, and a small Braavosi office took shape near the docks. Its sign bore the image of a coin balanced on a sword's tip, symbolizing trade and protection. The Braavosi official who ran it, a thin man named Yandos, greeted settlers with unfailing politeness, though few doubted he reported everything back to his masters across the sea. Yet Prosperity's glow brought flickers of dissent. A new rumor circulated that certain members of the council, specifically those involved in negotiations with Braavos, might be amassing private fortunes. The rumor was unsubstantiated, but it fueled suspicions. A fisherman loudly proclaimed at the market one morning that the settlement was selling out its independence to foreign bankers. The blacksmith accused the fisherman of ingratitude. A heated argument ensued, leaving onlookers uneasy. Through it all, Varys strove to maintain balance. He reassured the disgruntled that Haven's leadership welcomed scrutiny. He reminded them that the council was elected. If people were unhappy, they could vote in new representatives. But old habits of suspicion born of centuries under feudal lords died hard. A few grumbled that an ordinary fisherman could never truly influence decisions, no matter what illusions of voting were given. Sensing the tension, Varys worked with council leaders to hold open forums where any settler could speak their piece. Some used the opportunity to rant about petty disputes, others questioned the necessity of forging alliances with Braavos that might entangle Haven in foreign politics. Varys listened calmly, repeating the logic that alliances were essential for survival. The open forums did much to diffuse anger, and new voices emerged that might one day become council members themselves. Yet the question of Bareth lingered. Scouts in passing ships spotted no large war fleets assembling on the Storm Coast, but a steady trickle of smaller vessels, the type used for raiding, were said to be active near southern waters. Rumors claimed Bareth was gathering wealth from unsuspecting coastal villages, slowly rebuilding. Midsummer heat bore down on the settlement, drying the farmland and prompting the forging of irrigation ditches. In the evenings, breezes off the shivering sea offered respite, and families congregated along the harbor, dipping their feet in the cool water. The hustle of day gave way to the laughter of children chasing each other with handfuls of seashells. During one such evening, Varys found himself taking a solitary stroll along the outer perimeter. The wooden walkway atop the wall offered a vantage of farmland sloping toward pine forests. Soft moonlight cast the rows of crops in silver, while the occasional torchlit watchtower glowed like an ember in the night. He paused when he noticed Myranda near the northern tower, gazing across the moonlit fields as though searching for something. Her shoulder was healing well, though she still wore a bandage beneath her tunic. She glanced his way, then turned her attention back to the horizon. "It's beautiful out here," she said quietly. "That it is," he agreed, coming to stand beside her. Hard to believe how different life can be compared to King's Landing or the war-torn North. Myranda nodded, letting a silence linger. Then, in a softer voice, "I've been thinking about the difference between secrets used for good and secrets used for harm. Here, I see how your knowledge helps people. You prevent conflicts or mitigate them, gather allies, protect the settlement. It's admirable." Varys studied her profile in the moonlight. "You flatter me, but I'm no saint, Myranda. I do what I must, and I've done more than my share of dark deeds in the past. My hope is that here those skills might serve a better cause." She pursed her lips. "I wonder if the cause might ever tempt you to cross lines you'd rather not, like rooting out dissenters or blackmailing a rival to keep them quiet. Would you do that if you thought it best for Haven?" He weighed his words. "I prefer persuasion over threats, transparency over covert manipulation. But if the day came when the settlement was truly endangered from within, I'd do what was necessary to preserve it. That's the burden of leadership." She lowered her gaze. "That's what frightens me, I think. Even the noblest intentions can curdle under pressure. The Game of Thrones never ends. It just changes shape." A rueful smile touched Varys's lips. "And so we must remain vigilant, especially against our own worst impulses. That's why our council exists. No single person can decide everything. We share power, share responsibility." Myranda exhaled softly, as though releasing a weight. "Perhaps that's the only safeguard. For all its flaws, at least the council can check itself." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the night breeze ruffling their cloaks. The scent of pine and distant sea salt mingled. Once or twice, they heard the chirp of nocturnal birds or the muted laughter from the harbor. Here on the wall, Life felt precariously balanced between serenity and danger. Summer waned. The orchard trees bore fruit, and reapers harvested the fields. Haven's growth was evident in the bustle of wagons carrying grain to the mill, blacksmiths forging new tools, fishers hauling in larger catches. The Braavosi presence had also grown. A second official arrived to assist Yandos, and more foreign sailors roamed the docks. Some settlers eyed them warily, while others bartered eagerly for foreign spices and silk. One day, a Braavosi captain brought startling news. A rumor circulated in Essos that a dragon had been sighted far in the east, though no one could confirm if it was one of Daenerys Targaryen's lost beasts or a wild rumor. Varys found the notion unsettling, recalling the living weapons that had reshaped entire wars. Yet it was far from Haven's immediate concerns. Merrick's escort galleys continued to protect merchant vessels in local waters, collecting modest fees. Occasionally, they encountered ragtag pirates or raiders, but so far, no serious challengers. With each successful voyage, Haven's reputation as a bastion of safety grew, drawing more trade. That success also caught the attention of unscrupulous wanderers. More than once, the militia turned away groups of men who arrived with suspicious intentions, lacking families or any sign of honest labor. Amid these shifts, a small expedition of dedicated farmers and builders returned to the western shore, this time with heavier armed escort. Their aim was to build a fortified outpost, not a full settlement, just enough presence to keep mercenaries or raiders from establishing hidden camps. Over the course of late summer, they erected a stout watchtower on a rocky escarpment that overlooked a secluded bay. From there, a small garrison kept vigil. No further Sellsword attacks occurred, though the watchtower reported occasional sightings of unidentified sails hugging the coastline. Then, as autumn's first chill began to creep in, word reached Haven that Bareth was once again on the move. A Braavosi courier arrived breathless at the docks, handing Yandos a sealed missive, which eventually reached Varys. In it, a Braavosi contact in Gulltown claimed to have spied a large purchase of timber and pitch, consistent with the outfitting of ships. Bareth, it seemed, was rebuilding a fleet. The council convened at once. Captain Merrick, Kaleo, Jaren, Miranda, and the various council members pored over the letter. The blacksmith scowled. Did we not suspect this would happen? The man wants revenge. Kaleo nodded grimly. We can't be caught unprepared. How many ships can he muster? 5? 10? More? Merrick shrugged. We can't know for certain, but if he's purchasing these supplies, it might be more than a few. Possibly he's building cogs for troop transport. He might intend a larger invasion. A chill fell over the gathering. They had 2 escort galleys and the promise of some Braavosi support. But if Bareth assembled a proper war fleet, Haven could be outmatched. Varys's voice sliced through the tension. Let us not panic. We must confirm this intelligence, and if accurate, prepare our defenses and call upon Braavos to honor their agreements. They have a vested interest in our safety. A farmer interjected. What if Braavos decides it's too risky? They helped us once, but would they commit to a full naval battle just for trade routes? Varys folded his hands. That's why we must make it worth their while. Our new outpost on the western shore could serve as a safe haven for Braavosi ships. We can sweeten trade terms if needed. We must also rally any other communities Bareth has threatened. The more allies we have, the higher the likelihood of standing firm. The council spent hours drafting letters and strategies. Miranda volunteered to help draft carefully worded appeals, noting that she had some experience in delicate negotiations. Varys entrusted her with phrasing that might stir the Braavosi sense of profit and duty. Meanwhile, Jaren proposed leading a covert scouting mission to the Storm Coast to see Bareth's progress firsthand. Kaleo offered to accompany him, but Jaren pointed out that Kaleo's leadership was vital at home. Better to take a small team, quick and unnoticed. With the council's blessing, Jaren set off within days, accompanied by 2 skilled rangers and a translator who spoke the dialects common along the Storm Coast. They boarded a discreet fishing vessel that would sail close to the shoreline under cover of routine trading, then slip away to gather information. Back in Haven, tensions ran high. Each day, the air turned crisper, leaves blushing red and gold. The cycle of seasons reminded everyone that winter would soon return, making warfare on the seas more hazardous, but not impossible. If Bareth struck before the freeze, or if he waited until spring, either scenario brought anxiety. On a clear morning, Varys walked the perimeter of the harbor with Miranda. Workers were busy erecting an expanded warehouse for maritime supplies, while the Braavosi official Yandos oversaw the unloading of goods from a new arrival. Miranda spoke softly, as though not wanting the bustle to overhear. I've included subtle hints in our letters to Braavos that if Haven falls, they risk losing their investment. Hopefully that spurs them to respond with more than token aid. Varys gave a small nod. Good. We must always think in terms of their self-interest. Braavos respects coin above sentiment. She paused, gazing at him. I sometimes wonder, do you miss the power you once held in King's Landing? The webs you spun reached across continents. He considered the question. I miss having immediate influence, the ability to send a whisper and shape a king's decision. But I do not miss the constant threat of betrayal or the moral quagmire of choosing between lesser evils. Here, my influence is smaller, but the aim is clearer: protect these people, nurture this settlement. She smiled faintly. That clarity is rare. Before he could respond, a shout echoed from the docks. A fishing boat approached with urgent haste, a single sail patched and billowing. The watchers on the pier noted it was flying Haven's makeshift colors. As it drew closer, a figure at the prow waved frantically. It was Jaren, returned from his scouting mission far sooner than expected. A ripple of alarm spread through onlookers. Varys and Miranda hurried to the pier where the boat moored with a haphazard thump. Jaren leapt ashore, exhaustion etched into his face. One of his companions limped behind him, bandaged and grim. We found Bareth's fleet, Jaren said, voice tight. He's got at least 8 war galleys in various stages of completion and more cogs for troops. Looks like he's nearly done rebuilding from his losses. And that's not the worst of it. He paused, drawing a ragged breath. He's allied with a band of mercenaries, dozens of them, maybe more. We suspect they're from the Golden Company or an offshoot. They wear gold cloaks, well-armed, well-paid. They're drilling near the coast, readying to board ships when the time comes. Varys's chest tightened. The Golden Company was legendary for its discipline and loyalty to the highest bidder. If Bareth had that kind of muscle behind him, this was more than a raid. It was an invasion force. Kaleo, who had rushed from the training grounds, caught the tail end of the news. His jaw clenched. How long until they're ready to set sail? He demanded. Hard to say, Jaren replied. A month, 2 at most. We were nearly caught, so we couldn't linger. But they're definitely preparing for a campaign. We overheard talk of breaking the spider's nest once and for all. Varys closed his eyes, mind racing. A month or 2. They had to secure allies, finalize the defense, and possibly consider a preemptive strike. But such a strike against a well-fortified yard on the storm coast seemed suicidal with the small force Haven could muster. Summon the council at once, he ordered quietly. And Yandos. We must see how far Braavos is willing to go. Word spread like wildfire. Settlers hurried to the council hall, fear etched on many faces. The memory of the last invasion, with fewer ships and fewer mercenaries, still haunted them. If Bareth was bringing a large, disciplined force, could Haven's walls hold? Could 2 or 3 escort galleys withstand a real war fleet? In the council hall, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Representatives, militia officers, and concerned citizens crowded in. Yandos stood to one side, arms crossed, face expressionless. Kaleo, Jaren, Miranda, and Varys took seats at the front. The blacksmith began to speak, but fear choked his words. A fisherwoman tearfully asked if they should pack up and flee to the western outpost or beyond. Varys raised both hands, calling for calm. Running would only delay the inevitable. We built this settlement to stand for something. If we scatter, Bareth's forces will hunt us down or will starve as refugees. Our best chance is to defend Haven with every resource we have. We can't do it alone, Kaleo added, voice resonant. Braavos must help us more than before. We also should reach out to any lords in Westeros who might have reason to oppose Bareth. Yandos cleared his throat, stepping forward. Braavos is prepared to discuss expanded involvement. But my superiors will expect certain guarantees, exclusive trade rights, perhaps a stake in your shipyard. In short, Braavos will not fight your war for free. Murmurs of dismay rippled through the crowd. The tension soared again. They had to choose between possible destruction or forging deeper ties that might compromise their independence. Miranda rose, ignoring the ache in her shoulder, her voice calm yet firm. If we must negotiate, let us do so from a position of resolve. We will not become a Braavosi colony, but we can offer increased trade privileges and a share of the shipyard's profits. Enough to show them we're serious. Varys spoke next. Agreed. We can also approach certain disaffected lords in Westeros. Bareth has no rightful claim to the Stormlands or any recognized seat. The more legitimate lords might see him as a threat to their own interests. Even a few token ships or knights could tip the balance. A jangle of different voices rose, some in support, others voicing fears. Yandos watched quietly, measuring the room. Eventually, the council voted, with a strong majority favoring formal pleas for Braavosi naval support. A smaller delegation would also sail to White Harbor and the Vale, carrying letters of entreaty. They had to move quickly. In the days that followed, Haven bustled like a hive of anxious bees. Volunteers constructed additional ballistae on the walls. Blacksmiths worked day and night forging arrowheads, spears, and shield fittings. Carpentry teams reinforced the gates and built overhead cover for archers. The farmland near the perimeter was partially cleared of tall growth to deny attackers concealment. Children were sent inland, away from potential invasion routes, and families prepared emergency packs of supplies. Varys oversaw the diplomacy, drafting letters with Miranda's help. Yandos appended Braavosi seals to some missives, ensuring they reached the right ears. Captain Merrick readied the Free Current and the Shield of the Tides for possible battle. A third escort galley, nearing completion, might join them if they could finish it in time. Night after night, the watchtower bells sounded false alarms, distant sails that turned out to be harmless traders or fishing boats. Yet each alarm tightened the knot in everyone's chest. They knew that soon sails bearing the twisted stag banner would appear again on the horizon, possibly accompanied by mercenary troops. The forging of alliances proved no simple matter. Braavos demanded a written contract ensuring a permanent presence in Haven, complete with a small Braavosi quarter under their jurisdiction. The older faction in Haven balked at the idea of ceding any territory, but others argued it was a small price to pay for survival. After another tense debate, the council agreed to cede a strip of waterfront property near the existing Braavosi office to be governed under Braavosi rules. The vote was close and left a bitter taste in some mouths, but necessity won out. Meanwhile, envoys sent to White Harbor returned with tepid answers. The Manderleys sympathized with Haven but could not commit ships or knights without explicit permission from the king in the north, whoever that was now, given the continuing upheaval. The Vale's reply was equally noncommittal, referencing internal strife and new threats from bandits. Each disappointment reminded Haven that no lord or lady would rescue them. They stood largely alone, with Braavos as their only powerful ally. As the final days of autumn approached, the chill in the air mirrored the settlement's mood. Scouts ranged far along the island's coastline, scanning for any sign of Bareth's approach. Miranda spent long hours with Varys and the Braavosi officials refining the terms of their contract. Under candlelight, her quill scratched across parchment, finalizing the words that might shape Haven's future for generations. Kaleo and Jaren doubled militia drills, simulating different scenarios, an amphibious assault on the beach, a siege from the land side if Bareth's troops attempted a pincer movement. The tension was palpable, yet a grim determination solidified across the settlement. Even the once grumbling farmer who worried about war surrendered to the necessity of preparing. He sharpened pitchforks and taught younger folk how to reinforce barricades. One crisp morning, just as the sun broke over the eastern cliffs, the watchtower bell rang again. This time, the alarm was not false. A cluster of sails hovered at the edge of vision, slowly advancing. Through a spyglass, Jaren identified them, at least 4 cogs, presumably carrying soldiers, flanked by 2 galleys. The twisted stag banner flew from their masts. As the alarm spread, the settlement stirred like an anthill kicked by a careless boot. Militia members dashed to their positions, archers on the walls, spear carriers manning the gates. Civilians rushed inland or to designated shelters. Braavosi officials hastily conferred with Captain Merrick, planning how the 2 escort galleys, now joined by a newly finished third, the Rising Dawn, would intercept or delay the enemy. Within hours, the enemy fleet was close enough for watchers to count the rows of oars. The cogs bristled with mercenaries, their armor glinting in the sunlight. Even from the walls, one could sense the disciplined order among them. This was not a ragtag band. At the center of the line sailed a sleek war galley with black sails, presumably carrying Bareth himself. On the far side of the harbor, 2 Braavosi war galleys, promised by Yandos, positioned themselves. Their presence heartened Haven's defenders, though the odds remained uncertain. Kaleo led a small group of archers and marines onto the rising dawn, hoping to bolster the naval defense. Jaren stayed on the walls, commanding the archers from vantage points. Varys, flanked by Miranda, moved between battlements, steadying the defenders with calm words. A hush settled over the water as the enemy ships spread out in a crescent formation, preparing to envelop Haven's harbor. Then, with the low boom of a drummer's signal, the assault began. Flaming arrows arced from Bareth's galleys, streaking the sky with trails of fire. Haven's archers answered in kind while the Braavosi ships advanced, ramming the lead enemy galley amid a cacophony of splintering wood and roars of battle. Ashore, the cogs maneuvered to find a landing spot, seeking the patch of beach that Bareth's forces remembered from their previous invasion. But Haven was no longer the vulnerable settlement it had been. Trenches, sharpened stakes, and hidden pits greeted any who tried to land. Militia archers loosed volley after volley. Mercenaries spilled onto the sand, some falling to well-placed shafts before they could even form ranks. Others, more seasoned, used large shields to advance behind a deadly shield wall. Overhead, a cold wind whipped the smoke of battle into swirling shapes. Shouts, screams, and the clang of steel on steel filled the shoreline. The Braavosi galleys and Haven's escort vessels engaged Bareth's naval force in a chaotic melee of boarding actions and arrow flights. Captain Merrick's distinctive voice rang out as the free current tore into the side of an enemy cog, Marines leaping aboard to clash with mercenaries in close combat. Atop the walls, Jaren directed archers to target enemy officers. A javelin soared from below, slamming into the parapet near his shoulder. He flinched back, calling for more cover fire. Nearby, Miranda relayed messages from vantage points to Varys, who in turn shouted tactical adjustments to the militia. On seeing a group of mercenaries attempting to flank the beach from a narrow path among the rocks, Varys dispatched a squad of spearmen to intercept. The fight raged for hours, the tide turning back and forth. An early Braavosi advantage at sea was tempered by the sheer numbers of Bareth's troops. A well-coordinated push from the enemy cogs nearly overwhelmed the rising dawn, crippling her oars. But Kaleo led a desperate defense on the galley's deck, repelling boarders with sword and shield, eventually forcing them to retreat. On land, the mercenaries established a foothold on the beach, forming tight ranks behind large shields, creeping closer to the walls under covering fire from archers in the cogs' rigging. The sky darkened with the smoke of burning ships and the haze of battlefield dust. Haven's defenders poured boiling oil from the ramparts, forcing the attackers to pull back, screaming and battered. Then came a pivotal moment. A massive flaming projectile, launched from a makeshift catapult on Bareth's main galley, slammed into the southern gate, setting it ablaze. Panic rippled through Haven's defenders as flames licked the timber, threatening a breach. Archers turned their focus to the catapult, but Bareth's men formed a shielded guard, buying time for a second shot. If that gate collapsed, the mercenaries could charge in en masse. Varys, seeing the imminent danger, barked orders for a bucket brigade. Civilians and off-duty defenders rushed to douse the gate with water and sand. Miranda led them, ignoring the searing heat, her bandaged shoulder seeping fresh blood from exertion. The catapult loaded again. Jaren directed a hail of arrows at the catapult crew, downing some but not enough. The second projectile launched. An instant before it hit the gate, a Braavosi war galley angled its ballista and fired a countershot, a spiked bolt dipped in tar. Against all odds, the bolt struck the flaming missile mid-arc, knocking it off course. It crashed into the shallows, sending up a geyser of steam and sparks. A roar of triumph rose from Haven's walls. Emboldened, Captain Merrick surged the free current forward, ramming Bareth's main galley from the side. The deck erupted in chaos as Marines boarded, hacking through lines of mercenaries. Bareth himself, clad in ornate plate, appeared at the railing. He bellowed curses at the Braavosi and Haven's men, swinging a heavy sword that felled 2 Marines in swift succession. On the shore, Kaleo seized the moment. Leading a countercharge from the gate, he and his militia slammed into the reeling mercenaries, scattering them across blood-soaked sand. Arrows from the ramparts found gaps in the shield wall, and soon the once disciplined ranks began to fracture. Some mercenaries tried to rally, others fled to the surf. Meanwhile, on Bareth's galley, the fighting was furious. Captain Merrick dueled an enemy officer, narrowly avoiding a thrust that would have pierced his ribs. With a quick riposte, he took down his foe. The mercenaries found themselves pressed from two sides as the Braavosi war galley unleashed a volley of crossbow bolts from the opposite flank. Bareth, realizing he was outmaneuvered at sea, roared for his cogs to regroup. But some were already in flames or boarded. Panic spread among his allies. The tide of battle, quite literally, had turned against them. The final blow came when the shield of the tides, badly damaged but still afloat, swung around the burning wreck of an enemy cog and smashed into Bareth's galley near the stern. A swarm of Haven's marines clambered aboard. Surrounded, Bareth continued to fight with savage strength, cutting down two more attackers before Captain Merrick and a Braavosi officer closed in on him. Sensing defeat, Bareth hurled himself over the rail in an attempt to swim to another vessel, but crossbow bolts from the Braavosi found him in midair. He plunged into the churning waters, blood mixing with the salt waves. As soon as their commander disappeared, what remained of Bareth's forces began a full retreat. Some cogs attempted to flee, pursued by the Braavosi galleys. Others ran aground or capsized under the pounding of ballistae. On shore, the mercenaries who didn't make it back to the ships threw down their weapons or tried to flee into the forests, where they were hunted by cavalry squads that Haven had stationed inland. The aftermath was both horrific and triumphant. Smoke drifted across a harbor littered with debris and bodies. Fires smoldered on half-sunken ships. The southern gate was charred but intact. The beach, scarred with craters and footprints, resembled a scene from a nightmare. Yet Haven stood. In the end, the casualty lists were long, but not nearly as devastating as they might have been. Braavos had upheld its bargain and reaped a share of the spoils from captured ships. On the battered deck of the Free Current, Captain Merrick slumped against the rail, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but a victorious grin spread across his face. Callio embraced him, ignoring his own wounds. The battered militia cheered weakly as the Braavosi galleys signaled their success with trumpet blasts. Varys moved among the wounded, helping where he could, mindful of the tears and the moans of pain. He found Miranda kneeling beside an injured civilian, binding the man's leg with practiced care. Her own arm hung limp, reopened in the struggle against the fire at the gate. Yet her eyes shone with fierce relief when she saw Varys. "It's over," she whispered. "We did it." Varys knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her good shoulder. "Yes," he said, though sorrow weighed heavily in his voice. "We have won a great battle, but at a great cost." She glanced at the chaos around them. "Perhaps now they'll leave us in peace." "Perhaps," he echoed, though the realm was vast, full of new claimants and hungry warlords. The dream of lasting peace was precious, but the spider in him knew that vigilance would never end. Days later, as the fires were doused and the rubble cleared, Haven's people performed funerary rites for the fallen. The Braavosi left with trophies and a renewed contract, their captains congratulating Haven's defenders on their resilience. Word quickly spread across the shivering sea that Bareth had been defeated and drowned. A cautionary tale for any who might consider tangling with this new settlement of common folk who fought like cornered lions. In the months that followed, Haven rebuilt once again. Ashen timbers were replaced, battered ships repaired. The outpouring of gratitude and grief strengthened their bonds, forging a sense of unity that overshadowed earlier factions. The blacksmith hammered out new bells to replace the cracked ones, and those bells rang with a somber yet hopeful note across the settlement. Varys, in the quiet hours after the last funeral pyre, walked the ramparts with Miranda at his side. Snow had not yet fallen, but winter's chill was in the air. They looked out over the moonlit harbor where the silhouettes of damaged ships stood like wounded giants. Yet the settlement lights glowed bright behind the walls, a testament to the spirit that would not yield. "We have come far," Miranda said softly. "From a handful of huts to a community that can stand against a warlord and his mercenaries." Varys gazed at the lights, remembering the clamor of King's Landing's narrow streets, the cunning lords and ladies, the betrayals, the endless power struggles. Then he looked upon Haven, a place forged by people choosing a different path. Not without bloodshed, but with a determination that all were equal in the face of adversity. "Yes," he replied, his voice catching in his throat. "We have come far indeed, and there is further still to go. But for now at least, we have carved out a corner of this world where common folk can call themselves free, living by their own will and their own laws." "My." Randa gave him a gentle smile, then turned back to the harbor. A hush enveloped them, broken only by the faint lapping of waves against the pier. In that stillness lay a promise of hope born from hardship, of a tomorrow shaped not by the whims of kings but by the unity of simple people. Varys breathed in the cold air, a quiet conviction settling over him. He had once sought to protect the realm from tyrants by whispering in the shadows. Now he guarded a new realm in the open, forging alliances, facing enemies head-on. The tapestry of his life had changed, but its guiding thread, service to the people, remained intact. They stood there a while longer, gazing across the moonlit waters, letting the wind carry away the echoes of war. Then, together, they turned back into the heart of Haven, where weary souls found solace in each other and where the seeds of a new era might yet bloom in peace. The first flakes of winter had barely settled over Haven when the aftermath of Bareth's defeat rippled across the shivering sea. Traders, couriers, and refugees arrived in greater numbers than ever before, each bearing rumors that a once-feared warlord had perished in a doomed invasion against a community of common folk led by the infamous spider, Varys. Exaggerated stories of Haven's valor circulated in taverns from White Harbor to Braavos, imbuing the settlement with an almost legendary stature. But every proud legend is shadowed by a sober reality, and Haven's reality was that of a battered, weary people bracing for the next uncertain step. The days after the battle were dedicated to healing. The southern gate, charred and splintered, needed replacing. Sections of the wall that had been scorched by the catapult barrage were torn down and rebuilt using heavier stone foundations to resist future fires. Carpentry teams replaced broken ramparts. Shallow graves were dug for those who fell in the fight, both Haven's defenders and enemy mercenaries alike. In a solemn display of the settlement's principles, even the enemy dead received quiet rites before burial. "We bury the foe so that hatred does not fester," Varys stated simply when a few unsettled militia questioned why they should bother giving any honor to those who tried to kill them. Winter's chill became palpable. The farmland near the settlement was harvested swiftly, with every usable root vegetable, grain, and fruit gathered and stored. Crates of salted fish and dried herbs were stacked in the warehouses. The orchard's final yield of apples had been pressed into cider, sealed away for the cold months to come. With the threat of renewed conflict at least temporarily banished, daily life settled into a tense but determined rhythm. Miranda's arrow wound had largely healed, though her left arm remained stiff. She spent hours each day aiding the healers. Twice a week, she joined the council, where her measured advice on external relations was proving increasingly valuable. Her quiet efficiency, combined with her willingness to question assumptions, carved a niche for her in Haven's growing leadership structure. Some older settlers took a while to accept her, an outsider so recently arrived, but her cool-headed conduct during the crisis had earned enough goodwill that criticism mostly fell away. Kaleo, battered and bruised from the final clash on the rising dawn, recovered under the watchful eye of the healers. Despite persistent aches, he resumed his duties training new recruits. The settlement's population had swelled with arrivals who, upon hearing of Bareth's defeat, saw Haven as a beacon of safety and opportunity. Among them were young men and women who quickly volunteered for militia service, swelling the ranks. Kaleo spent frigid mornings drilling them in the yard behind the council hall, drilling them again at dusk for good measure. "Skill saved us last time," he would say, voice echoing across the frosty air. "Next time, we'll need even more." Though winter pressed in, the sea rarely froze completely at their latitude thanks to the ocean currents. Braavosi ships continued to arrive sporadically, bringing trade goods and more building materials to help reconstruct battered fortifications. Yandos, the Braavosi official, appeared quite satisfied. His city had gained a secure foothold on Haven's waterfront, a small but growing district of a few stone buildings and a dock extension flying the seal of Braavos. To keep the settlement on his side, he ensured each Braavosi ship carried supplies that Haven could use: grain, dried fish from the eastern coasts, even medical herbs from the famed Braavosi greenhouses. In return, the council recognized Braavosi autonomy over that slim slice of harbor. A wave of disquiet fluttered through parts of the population who felt uneasy about ceding any piece of Haven's territory to outsiders. But Varys and others on the council argued that it was a small price to pay for an alliance that had saved their lives. The arrangement sparked ongoing debates about independence, sovereignty, and the future shape of Haven's governance. The open forums became weekly instead of monthly as more and more people stepped forward to voice opinions or propose bylaws. On one such evening, a traveling bard named Persin enthralled a packed crowd in the council hall with ballads celebrating Haven's triumph over Bareth. After playing a lively tune on a lute decorated with seashells, Persin launched into a story about hearing of Haven from gulls. By the time he finished, the hall rang with applause, tensions momentarily forgotten. Varys, seated off to one side, watched carefully. He recognized in Persin's words the seeds of myth-making, how a place or event could balloon into legend. He wondered whether a legend would protect Haven or simply invite more trouble. During the early snows, Miranda finally agreed to let the infirmary's new healer, a middle-aged woman named Elise, remove the final stitches from her wound. Elise offered a balmy ointment of local herbs that eased the pain, remarking that Miranda's recovery was a testament to her strong constitution. Or a testament to her stubbornness, Varys quipped when he dropped by to check on her. Miranda managed a wry smile. She stood to stretch, wincing only slightly. Elise left them alone in the small chamber, bustling off to care for another patient. Miranda folded her arms. I spoke with some of the newer arrivals this week. A group of fishers from the Riverlands and a handful of potters from the Reach. They told me they've never seen a place governed by simple folk. They barely believe it's real even when they're standing in it. That disbelief is natural, Varys said quietly. For centuries, all power in Westeros came from noble birth or conquest. Seeing a settlement thrive without a noble banner or a crowned monarch must feel like stepping into a fable. Miranda's lips curved in a small grin. Strange how quickly that fable has become my home. I don't miss the old days. I only wish more people could see that there's another way to live. Varys nodded. Someday, perhaps. But for all the dreams of shaping a new paradigm, Haven's immediate concerns were practical. Snow arrived in earnest, draping the settlement in white. The watchtower at the western outpost reported strong gales rolling off the sea. Food distribution was carefully rationed. Though the harvest had been decent, so many new mouths strained resources. The blacksmith began forging more stoves and extra nails for repairs, while the carpenters rushed to fix leaky roofs before the chill sank deeper. Winter in Haven was quieter than winter in the north, less fierce than, say, the frozen wastelands beyond the neck, but the storms rolling in from the shivering sea could be ferocious, with whipping gusts and sleet that stung like needles. The settlement hunkered down, storing firewood, lighting braziers. Children trudged about in thick boots, cheeks red, making games of sliding on icy patches. At night, families gathered indoors, telling stories by candlelight, knitting, or carving small wooden trinkets to pass the long hours. One bracing dawn, Jaren alerted Varys that a small boat had been sighted drifting near the rocky shallows of the northern coastline. Its sail was ragged, its mast broken. No one answered the shouts from Haven's lookout. Concerned, the militia launched a rescue skiff, braving bitter winds to reach the half-ruined craft. They found 3 half-starved men aboard, one already frozen to death. The survivors, trembling and barely coherent, were brought to the infirmary. When they finally woke, they told a story that sent ripples through Haven's leadership. They had been part of a much larger vessel carrying refugees from King's Landing, fleeing violence and famine. Their ship had foundered in a storm. Most were lost at sea. They had only drifted by chance to Haven's shores. King's Landing, it seemed, was once again engulfed in turmoil. The throne was contested, though who exactly claimed it was murky in the survivors' rambling account. A plague or some sickness reportedly burned through Flea Bottom, spurred by rat infestations and poor sanitation. Food prices had soared beyond the reach of common people. The Red Keep, rumor said, was under new rule, perhaps another pretender to Targaryen heritage or a lesser-known Baratheon cousin. The men didn't know details. They only knew they had to escape. Any ship that would take them, they boarded, hoping to reach a rumored safe haven across the water. Varys mulled this development soberly. He had once believed that if a worthy ruler emerged, the realm could stabilize. Yet chaos seemed cyclical, devouring each new claimant. Haven had thus far remained apart from these dynastic wrangles, forging its own quiet destiny. The question lingered, could they remain aloof indefinitely? Especially if wave after wave of refugees sought shelter here? Word spread among Haven's residents. Some, remembering their own flights from war or famine, pressed for the settlement to welcome any who arrived in need. Others saw only the risk, more mouths to feed, more potential infiltrators or criminals among them. Tensions flared at the next open forum, with one group shouting that charity must have limits and another group replying that their entire ethos was built on providing a new start to the downtrodden. Eventually, the council resolved to accept refugees but demanded stricter documentation or at least interviews to ensure no hidden threats. Miranda volunteered to lead a small team tasked with questioning newcomers, quietly evaluating their backstories. Jaren and a couple of his scouts joined the effort, balancing compassion with vigilance. The battered boat's survivors, once recovered, offered to do any labor required just to stay. True to Haven's philosophy, they were integrated into the fishing and net-mending crews. Before long, they were pulling their weight, trudging along the frozen docks with nets slung over shoulders. As winter wore on, it became clear that Barrett's defeat had opened a vacuum of sorts along various maritime routes. Pirates, smaller warlords, and raiders tested the waters, unsure if Haven and Bravos would respond as forcefully. On several occasions, the Free Current and Shield of the Tides, along with the Bravosi war galley, intercepted suspicious vessels near the shipping lanes. A few brief skirmishes erupted. Usually, the sight of combined Haven-Bravosi strength was enough to deter open conflict. Slowly, a pattern emerged in these encounters. Many of the would-be raiders had ties to the Stepstones or to certain factions in Essos unsettled by shifting trade alliances. Word that Bravos had effectively annexed a corner of the Shivering Sea with Haven's blessing circulated through black markets. Some saw opportunity, others saw challenge. That meant Haven was unlikely to see long-term tranquility. Whether they liked it or not, they were becoming a strategic point, an outpost of trade and refuge in a region historically neglected. Amid these undercurrents, Varys devoted his nights to quiet reflection in his chambers. There, by candlelight, he compiled a growing archive of letters, trade agreements, pacts with local fishing villages, notes from Bravosi bankers, sketches of new defenses. Miranda assisted sometimes, though she found the endless bureaucratic details draining. Varys, on the other hand, seemed energized by it. This, in a way, was an extension of his old craft, whispering, planning, shaping the fates of thousands through the careful management of alliances. Only now, his goal was not to seat a king but to safeguard a realm of common folk. When the deep snows finally began to recede, the clang of hammers on steel once more filled the air. The settlement stirred with the promise of a fresh beginning. Farmers trudged out to the half-thawed fields, turning the dark, moist soil. Shipwrights checked the hulls of their galleys, scraping away winter's crust of ice and barnacles. At the Bravosi quarter, new storehouses went up, indicating that trade would soon ramp up again. Captain Merrick oversaw repairs to the Rising Dawn, which had taken serious damage in the final battle. The battered ship had proven her worth, so the settlement invested time and resources in making her seaworthy again. As the days lengthened, returning sunlight revealed not just budding leaves but also deeper problems. The question of future governance rose anew. Haven had begun as a rough collective, guided largely by Varys and a council of elected representatives. But with the population nearing 2,000 souls and many more predicted to arrive, some form of more structured administration seemed inevitable. Disputes grew more complex, and the settlement's informal laws were challenged by new circumstances. Several council members proposed codifying the laws, property rights, inheritance, crime and punishment, trade tariffs, and more. Others argued that writing laws too strictly might mirror the oppressive codes of Westeros's great houses. That debate became the main friction point in the spring. Open forums stretched late into the night with occasional shouting. Some recalled the final confrontation with the mercenaries and demanded even harsher measures to deter crime. Others insisted that the settlement's spirit of openness and second chances must be preserved. Varys often mediated, carefully phrasing suggestions to bridge the factions. Miranda, too, became a voice of reason. But no simple resolution emerged. In a decisive move, the council elected to form a lawmaking assembly, 20 representatives, each chosen from a specific group: farmers, fishers, merchants, healers, artisans, and the militia. This assembly would draft the settlement's first official code of laws. Varys declined to take a seat, saying he preferred to advise. He did accept a role as an unofficial archivist, storing documents and offering historical perspectives. Miranda, recognized for her literacy and calm counsel, was nominated by the artisans to represent them. She tried to refuse, but they insisted. So she found herself in the thick of the most sweeping political effort Haven had ever undertaken. Meetings of the lawmaking assembly took place in the council hall, beneath tall windows that let in the spring sun. The air was thick with the smell of ink and parchment as the representatives argued definitions of theft, boundaries of farmland, the rights of orphans, and the limits of militia authority. Hours upon hours were spent dissecting scenarios. Varys hovered at the edges, stepping in to reference how other cities handled such matters. He cautioned them to keep the laws flexible enough to adapt to Haven's unique ethos. Some listened, others worried he was exerting undue influence. One sticky debate centered on the concept of high justice. Who could authorize an execution? Should they retain the policy of allowing criminals who showed remorse to redeem themselves through labor, or was that too lenient for certain crimes? The memory of the captured mercenaries and the day the council had executed one hovered in everyone's minds. In the end, they compromised. Death sentences would only be carried out if the assembly itself, not a single official, reached a 2/3 majority. For lesser crimes, a tiered system of fines, labor, and restitution to victims would be employed. That decision raised further questions about how to organize the settlement's capacity to oversee forced labor, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the mercy extended to criminals who agreed to join the settlement had yielded mixed results. Some wholeheartedly embraced Haven's ways, becoming staunch defenders. Others vanished at the first opportunity, stealing supplies or gold on their way out. The new code sought to address this by making sure no ex-criminal could access certain sensitive roles such as the militia or positions with direct control over resources unless they proved themselves over a set period. Some found it harsh, others thought it necessary. During these frenzied sessions, Miranda discovered she had a knack for forging compromises. She listened attentively, asked clarifying questions, and coaxed out common ground. Whenever tempers flared, she spoke softly but firmly, guiding the discussion back to practicality. More than one assembly member confided to Varys that her level head saved them from descending into chaos. Varys privately felt a glimmer of pride that Haven had no feudal traditions forcing a single hierarchy on them. This was messy, but it was also genuine self-governance. Outside the hall, daily life bristled with new tasks. Dozens of fresh refugees arrived on the half-dozen ships that made the crossing from the mainland or the southern seas each month. Most were exhausted, carrying all they owned in sacks or crates. Some told grim tales of bandits roving the Reach, the Vale splintered by petty lords, and King's Landing locked in a cycle of plague and intermittent riots. The council authorized new sections of farmland, though clearing the rocky soil proved an uphill struggle. Skilled builders erected communal housing to keep up with the population surge, and the orchard was expanded with saplings transplanted from the western part of the island. The Braavosi presence also evolved. A new official arrived, a stern woman named Jean Rendoon, replacing the polite but somewhat passive Yandos. Jean made no secret of her aim to expand Braavos's commercial influence as far as possible. She pushed for a dedicated Braavosi-run bank branch on Haven soil, offering loans to local merchants for a share of their profits. Some bristled at the idea of foreign bankers controlling financial strings. Others saw it as an opportunity to grow trade and infrastructure. The newly formed lawmaking assembly, still in the midst of drafting Haven's code, scrambled to figure out how or if they could regulate such ventures. Varys recognized the subtle threat in Jean's posture. If the assembly tried to curb Braavosi business too heavily, Braavos might reduce its naval support. Or worse, they might cripple Haven's trade. He advised the assembly to craft balanced regulations that neither gave Braavos free rein nor alienated them. Debate raged for days, ultimately yielding a set of guidelines that taxed Braavosi financial transactions modestly but also permitted them to lend money at interest. The arrangement was uneasy, but for now it stood. In the late spring, the first codified sections of Haven's legal code were unveiled to the public. Crowds gathered in the courtyard outside the council hall to hear them read aloud by a herald with a booming voice. Murmurs followed each new statute. The code laid out general principles: no one was above the law, all disputes must be mediated by neutral parties if possible, and all major decisions required open deliberation. The people, on the whole, seemed cautiously pleased. Some of the assembly's more controversial measures, like structured labor for petty criminals, prompted grumbles, but no open revolt emerged. Amid the swirl of institutional change, life in Haven pressed on. Crop yields improved with each new patch of cleared land. The orchard blossomed in white and pink, a hopeful sign of the coming fruit. Fishermen tested deeper waters, netting larger catches. The Braavosi office grew, hosting a rotating group of financiers and trade liaisons who negotiated cargo shipments from Essos. The militia, now several hundred strong, patrolled the island's perimeter, mindful that even with Bareth gone, new threats could surface. Kaleo, recovered fully from his wounds, spent many hours traveling between the main settlement and the western watchtower. That outpost had expanded slightly, enough to house a small stable and a blacksmith's forge. He oversaw the training of local guards, ensuring that if any group of raiders landed on the western shore, Haven would not be caught off guard. The militias from both ends of the island practiced joint maneuvers, learning signal codes with horns and flags. Their discipline impressed even the Braavosi sailors who occasionally came ashore to observe. One clear morning, Miranda crossed paths with Varys on her way to the council hall. Her expression was oddly grave. In her hand, she clutched a sealed missive bearing the sigil of House Manderley, a leaping silver merman. She had received it from a traveling merchant who claimed to be an emissary of White Harbor. He said it was urgent that the settlement's leaders read this. Miranda told Varys quietly, "I'm bringing it to the assembly, but I wanted your thoughts first." Varys accepted the letter and broke the seal, scanning its contents. Lord Manderley, or someone writing on his behalf, had penned a courteous but concerned note. It spoke of rumors that various exiled lords from the Crownlands and Stormlands were pooling resources to lay claim to any unaligned territory, seeing it as a chance to carve out their own holdings. House Manderley was warning Haven that the chaos in King's Landing would likely spill outward, and they were also inquiring if Haven had any official stance or relationship with the North. Varys looked up from the parchment. It seems some in the North want to know if we can be of use to them, or if we're a potential threat that might side with their enemies. They're too far away to control us, but they don't want an unknown factor stirring the pot. Miranda sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. We can't just ignore them. But forging a formal alliance might pull us into the wars we've tried to avoid. Indeed, Varys replied. Yet ignoring them might be taken as a slight. A measured response is best, friendly but non-committal. We'll remind them we have no quarrel with legitimate houses of the North, but we also have no intention of pledging fealty. She nodded. I'll bring this to the Assembly. Will you attend the debate? He paused, weighing the request. In recent days, Varys had tried to keep a slight distance from the legislative process, letting the new generation shape Haven's destiny without feeling overshadowed by him. But with this particular issue, his expertise in Westerosi politics could be invaluable. Yes, I'll offer my perspective if asked. Thus, that afternoon, the Assembly convened, the letter read aloud to them. Discussions circled around the question of neutrality versus alliance. Kaelio argued that an alliance with the North would deter smaller would-be conquerors. Others countered that any formal treaty might alienate Braavos, which historically had no love for Westerosi entanglements. Miranda suggested a carefully worded reply, offering open trade and mutual goodwill but stopping short of a binding pact. A moderate majority supported that path. Varys was relieved. He recalled how swiftly alliances in Westeros could shift from helpful to lethal. If the North ended up embroiled in yet another war for the Iron Throne, Haven's official alliance might drag them into conflict they had no desire to fight. Better to remain a friendly, independent neighbor than a vassal or entangled ally. Word was sent back to White Harbor on the next Braavosi ship that departed for the mainland, a polite, measured response, promising trade and hospitality but no formal oath. Whether the Manderleys or their superiors in the North found this acceptable, time would tell. For now, the settlement could only wait and see. In early summer, a slow but steady influx of travelers arrived, many from war-torn corners of the Riverlands or the Crownlands. Some came in battered carts via small ships that docked along the coast. Others, unbelievably, made the journey all the way from Storm's End, describing a battered region full of petty despots. One small caravan of half a dozen families arrived bearing flags with a stag and lion crest, once loyal Baratheon Lannister retainers, they claimed. They insisted they wanted no trouble, only a place to live in peace. The irony that they bore the combined sigils of two great houses was not lost on Haven's residents. Although suspicion flared, the newcomers swore they had never served Bareth specifically. After thorough questioning, the council permitted them to settle on the outskirts of the farmland under close watch. During these weeks, Miranda and Varys collaborated on a new program, Settlement Induction. Rather than letting arrivals scatter at will, they would pass through a 3-day orientation where they met members of the council, learned Haven's basic laws, and were assigned a role or craft. After orientation, each person was directed to a sponsor, a seasoned settler who'd help them navigate day-to-day tasks. This system aimed to reduce confusion and discourage would-be troublemakers from lurking in the shadows. It wasn't foolproof, but it helped maintain order in a population growing faster than the council ever anticipated. Meanwhile, tensions with the Braavosi quarter simmered. Jean Rendoon began offering personal loans at interest to Haven's craftspeople, sometimes employing predatory terms. When a local fisherman defaulted on a loan used to buy a larger boat, Braavosi agents seized his smaller craft as collateral, leaving him jobless. An outcry ensued, fueling suspicion that Braavos intended to effectively own Haven's economy. The fisherman's wife confronted Jean in the street, shouting accusations until the Braavosi official retreated behind armed guards. The assembly was forced to intervene, forging a revised set of guidelines limiting the percentage rate on loans and requiring disputes to be resolved by a neutral arbiter. Jean feigned compliance but exuded an air of smugness that made it clear she found these rules irritating. Varys recognized the pattern. Braavos rarely employed brute force, preferring financial shackles. If not carefully managed, the settlement could end up indebted. He and Miranda redoubled efforts to ensure that Haven built its own capacity for trade, developing local crafts, forging alliances with small ports who might buy their produce and fish. The idea was to reduce dependence on Braavosi coin, but it took time. Haven's new economic ventures were still embryonic, and each new enterprise required more workers, more resources, more organization. The entire settlement, in effect, was learning to be a nation-state in miniature. Summer roared onward, blazing and brilliant. The orchard burgeoned with fruit. Strawberries ripened in newly cleared plots. Ships glided in and out of the harbor itself a swirl of color and language. On good days, the lively trade and the sight of new galleys under construction thrilled Varys's heart. On bad days, heated arguments over loan disputes, farmland boundaries, or the intricacies of the new legal code made him question how anyone could manage a realm. No wonder Westeros was perpetually at war. One midday, as Varys concluded a meeting in the council hall, Kaelio burst through the doors, armor clanking. His face shone with perspiration. He beckoned for Varys to follow, saying something about a visitor at the docks who claims to know you from King's Landing. Intrigued, Varys obliged, gathering Miranda along the way. They strode through the bustling market where hawkers sold fresh fish and newly harvested produce and arrived at the pier. Waiting there was a tall, spare figure with a lined face and scraggly gray hair, standing beside a modest sloop. He wore faded finery under a cloak that had seen better days. On spotting Varys, the man gave a tense bow. It took Varys a moment to place him, then recognition flickered. Ser Lambert Tywin? Varys said slowly. He recalled the name from the Red Keep's endless swirl of lesser knights and petitioners. Tywin had once been on the fringes of court, seeking favors, never quite achieving distinction. Lord Varys, Ser Lambert replied, voice trembling. I didn't believe the rumors, but I had to see for myself. They say you rule an entire island of your own now, far from the Iron Throne. Miranda snorted softly, but Varys held up a hand in a calming gesture. I do not rule here, Ser Lambert. I serve these people who govern themselves. The knight looked around, taking in the robust activity of the docks with a mixture of awe and lingering disbelief. I bring tidings from the Crownlands, he said eventually. King's Landing is consumed by disease and famine. There's talk of a new purge in the Red Keep. Any rumored traitors to the current occupant of the throne are being executed. Travelers heading north claim the roads are thick with highwaymen. I fled with my family. We barely escaped a riot on the Street of Steel. Varys nodded. I'm sorry to hear it. You seek refuge here? Ser Lambert exhaled shakily. I do, but not just for me. I have others aboard, a handful of families who served smaller houses. We heard Haven welcomes those in need. That we do, Varys said. Then, noticing the exhaustion in Ser Lambert's face, he gestured for Kaelio to help. We'll arrange housing, but you and yours must abide by our laws. All who come must work or learn a trade. Are you prepared for that? Ser Lambert bowed his head. If it means surviving, we'll do anything. They were in the midst of guiding the new arrivals toward the orientation process when Miranda noticed a woman among them who wore a brooch shaped like a rose. Miranda recognized it as a symbol once favored by younger daughters of House Tyrell. The woman was haggard, hair limp with travel grime, but her bearing hinted at highborn origins. Later, as they processed the group in the orientation hall, Miranda learned the woman was named Melissa Tyrell, a distant cousin of the main Tyrell line that once ruled the Reach. House Tyrell, of course, had been largely destroyed in the wars that ravaged Westeros, with new houses taking or disputing Highgarden. Melissa explained that she had survived by blending into lesser courts, eventually clinging to Ser Lambert's household when King's Landing became unbearable. Her presence caused a small stir among the orientation staff. Some muttered that highborn were no better than the lords who caused such misery. Others argued that her lineage was meaningless now. Varys spoke with her personally, asking if she planned to bring old feudal claims with her. She shook her head, voice quavering. That world is gone. I only want a chance to live without fear. If I must farm or mend sails, I'll do so. Touched by her humility, Varys assured her that if she kept to Haven's ways, no one would use her past against her. Melissa's eyes shone with relief. Still, the news of continued chaos in King's Landing and beyond weighed heavily. Varys wondered how many more battered souls would wash up on Haven's shores. He braced for an influx that could double or triple the population if matters grew worse across the narrow sea. Summer drifted toward autumn, leaving behind a swirl of successes and struggles. The orchard yielded an abundant crop of apples, used for pies and cider that brightened morale. The farmland expanded further inland, requiring the building of new irrigation ditches. The Braavosi quarter thrived commercially, though it remained a flashpoint for cultural tensions. Fewer direct threats surfaced at sea, perhaps because news of Barrett's downfall still echoed, warning off would-be raiders. Yet the next menace was never far off. One evening, a small group of outraged settlers confronted Jean Rendoun in front of the Braavosi office, accusing her of setting predatory interest rates that had already driven several families into impossible debt. They demanded she return some of the seized assets or face punishment under Haven's code. Jean coolly insisted that, as a Braavosi official, she and her transactions were subject to Braavosi law alone. The crowd grew heated. Shouts turned to jostling. Militia arrived, forming a protective circle around the official. Varys and Miranda rushed to intervene, reminding everyone that violence would only serve to escalate tensions that could endanger the entire settlement. 2 days later, the assembly held a tense session in which Jean was invited to attend. She refused, sending a junior scribe with a polite but dismissive letter. The letter reiterated Braavos's extraterritorial rights in the quarter, citing the contract that the council had signed. Miranda's frustration was evident. This was never meant to be a blank check for them to ruin people's lives, she muttered to Varys. But the language of the contract was ambiguous enough that Jean exploited it effectively. Worry not at Haven's leadership. A handful of smaller tradespeople had actually relocated their shops into the Braavosi quarter, hoping to attract richer clients. In doing so, they found themselves under Braavosi jurisdiction, subject to heavy taxes or forced loans. Some thrived if they kept up with the payments, but others sank deeper into debt. Slowly, the council realized that if Braavos gained control of too much commerce, they could hold Haven hostage financially. Kaleo suggested they push the Braavosi out entirely, tearing up the contract. But that risked losing the alliance that had saved them from Bareth. The city on the lagoon commanded a powerful navy, and alienating them might invite aggression or block Haven's access to crucial trade routes. Over the next few sessions, the assembly deliberated possible amendments, though it was uncertain if Braavos would even entertain them. Meanwhile, the tension on the streets simmered, poised to boil over if another inciting incident occurred. While the leadership wrestled with the Braavosi puzzle, Captain Merrick and the militia turned their attention to another matter, a series of alarming sightings near the western watchtower. According to watchers, a handful of unidentified ships had been lurking off the coast, always staying just beyond arrow range. They never attempted to land, never attacked. They simply hovered in the distance, sails furled as though observing. Then they would slip away if approached. Kaleo led a small detachment in the Shield of the Tides to investigate, but by the time they reached open water, the mysterious vessels vanished. A few days later, watchers saw them again. Anxiety bubbled at the outpost. Rumors flew: pirates, ex-mercenaries regrouping, or another faction from Westeros quietly scouting. Jaren, who was posted there temporarily, wrote to Varys that the ship's sails bore no distinct sigil, only a faded pattern that might have once been a crown or a griffin. It was too distant to confirm. The watchers and scouts remained on high alert. Every dawn, they scanned the horizon. The settlement braced for an incursion that never came. Some worried it might be part of a larger plot, someone gathering intelligence on Haven's defenses, waiting for a perfect moment to strike. Others believed it was just a band of lost or disorganized vessels. In any case, the sightings persisted for 2 weeks, then abruptly stopped with no explanation. By harvest time, the orchard bowed under the weight of apples, pears, and newly introduced plum trees. Farmers reaped barley and wheat. The entire settlement bustled with harvest fairs, and for a few fleeting days, laughter drowned out worry. Families strolled through the marketplace, sampling pastries and exchanging gossip about the children who had grown so quickly in a single year. The orchard's fragrance of ripe fruit mingled with the crisp autumn air, forging a sense of warmth that belied all the struggles that lay in wait. That sense of temporary peace crystallized at a feast the assembly hosted to celebrate the near completion of the new farmland expansions. For the first time, the main hall saw tables laden with such variety: roasted vegetables, spiced fish, hearty bread, fruit tarts. Musicians played lively tunes and young couples danced. Miranda had to be coaxed onto the dance floor by a group of artisans, where she managed a small, embarrassed smile. Varys, though not one to dance, watched from the sidelines, clapping politely at the swirling couples. In the candlelit corners, older settlers reminisced about how they had arrived here with little more than the clothes on their backs. Children ran laughing underfoot, weaving between chairs. Even some of the Braavosi official staff joined in, though Jean herself did not appear. Whatever sour feelings hung in the air were momentarily subdued by the camaraderie of a good harvest. Near midnight, the music grew softer and people trickled home. Miranda found Varys standing alone on a balcony overlooking the harbor, the stars reflecting in the dark water. He had a cup of cider in hand, untouched. She asked if he was all right. He exhaled, allowing a faint smile. Just savoring the moment, I suppose. This place has grown beyond my wildest imaginings. A year ago, we were huddled in wooden huts, patching holes in our walls. Now we argue about trade contracts and maritime borders like any established realm. Part of me marvels at it, and another part wonders how we hold it all together. Miranda leaned on the railing. We hold it together because people believe in it. Not just you, not just me. It's become bigger than any one person. Varys nodded, the lines on his face etched deeper by the moonlight. I hope that's enough when the next test comes, because it will come in one form or another. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. We'll face it, just as we have before. In the days that followed, autumn advanced. Leaves turned gold and red, swirling around the settlement's cobbled walkways. The orchard's final harvest of apples was pressed into cider. The farmland was carefully gleaned, ensuring minimal waste before the first frosts. Braavosi trade ships still arrived, though less frequently, possibly due to shifting winds and safer routes in warmer waters. Some militiamen took leave to help their families on farms, trusting that no large-scale threat would emerge right on the cusp of winter. But fate, as ever, had a different plan. One dreary afternoon, as a cold drizzle slicked the rooftops, a scout galloped through the main gate, mud spattering his horse's flanks. He called for the council at once. Gathered in the hall, dripping rain on the floorboards, he caught his breath and delivered disturbing news. A large band of armed men had been sighted moving across the western part of the island on foot. At least 40 or 50 strong, they marched in a loose formation, heading toward the watchtower. The watchers had not recognized their banners. Dark cloth with no clear sigil. They wore mismatched armor, yet they seemed too organized to be mere bandits. Alarm flashed through the room. Kaleo, instantly on alert, demanded details. How close, how heavily armed? The scout estimated the band might reach the watchtower in a day or two, depending on the terrain. They carried swords, spears, and crossbows. Some wore partial plate, indicating wealth or backing from a well-funded source. Varys rose, a sense of dread coiling in his stomach. This could be the same rope we suspected was scouting our shores, he said quietly. They might have come ashore somewhere remote. Or perhaps they paid a smuggler to bring them. Either way, they're deep inland now. The council erupted in debate. Some insisted on sending a large militia force to crush them immediately. Others feared leaving the main settlement underdefended if it was a feint. Ultimately, a compromise emerged. Kaleo would lead a force of 50 well-trained militia to meet this threat head-on, while the rest would remain to guard Haven. A smaller group would man the watchtower as a fallback position. They would attempt to parley first, if only to glean the attacker's purpose. If the intruders refused talks, conflict was inevitable. At dawn the next day, the militia set out in organized ranks, sturdy boots sloshing through rain-soaked ground. Kaleo rode at the front, flanked by Miranda, who volunteered once again to use her skill in negotiation if the group was open to discussion. The choice to bring Miranda proved controversial given her earlier injury, but she insisted she was fit enough and that an attempt at diplomacy might spare lives. Varys stayed behind to coordinate defenses, trusting Kaleo and Miranda to handle the field command. Their company made good time, crossing the interior roads that had been carved through stands of pine and rolling hills. By midday, scouts signaled that they had found the intruders' trail, churned mud, snapped branches, and occasional footprints. The men seemed to be moving in a methodical approach toward the watchtower, possibly following a rough map or prior reconnaissance. Kaleo ordered his force to spread out in a crescent formation, aiming to encircle or at least corral the intruders. Miranda, heart-pounding, mentally rehearsed how she would address them if diplomacy proved viable. The militia advanced carefully, cautious of ambush. Drizzle turned the soil slick. Clouds pressed low, reducing visibility. The scent of wet pine permeated everything. Then came the cry of a forward scout. Kaleo's group halted. They saw the intruders spread across a small clearing ahead, partially concealed by scraggly trees. At least 4 men, as the scout had reported. Some wore half-helmets, others none at all. Their clothing looked patched as though drawn from many armies. A few carried crossbows, the rest brandished swords or spears. At their center stood a tall man in battered breastplate, flanked by 2 watchful lieutenants. Kaleo raised a hand in a gesture of peace, stepping forward with Miranda. Behind them, the militia fanned out, weapons ready but not raised. The tall man at the center of the intruders saw them coming and barked in order. His people formed a ragged line. Crossbows lifted, aimed. Tension surged. Miranda swallowed, her breath hitching. She held up empty hands, calling out, "We are the militia of Haven, and we ask your intent on our lands. We wish to speak before anyone sheds blood." A pause. The tall man stepped closer, crossbow bolts still trained on Kalio's force. Rain streaked his unshaven face. Up close, Miranda could see an old scar crossing his brow and a relentless hardness in his eyes. She expected him to snarl or launch an attack, but instead, he spoke in a thick accent reminiscent of the Crownlands. "Haven, is it? So that's the name you go by. We heard rumor of a place that defies lords and kings. A place rich with farmland and fish. Perfect for the taking." Kalio's jaw clenched. "We do not bow to any lord, but we also do not threaten those who come in peace. Lay down your weapons, and we can discuss terms." A bitter laugh escaped the man's lips. "Terms? My men and I have come a long way. Some fought for House Rosby, others for House Celtigar, still others for whomever paid. We lost everything in the Crownlands madness. Now we take what we need." Miranda took a breath. "This settlement was built by people fleeing war and oppression, just as you have. We can offer you a chance to live with us, under our laws, if that is your wish. But we won't allow a band of armed men to threaten our homes." His gaze flicked over her, sizing her up, then shifted to Kalio and the militia. "You speak with the confidence of a well-fed people. I see you have good steel, but our crossbows are loaded, and you stand in the open." At this, Kalio's face hardened. "If you attack, you'll face the full might of Haven's militia. We've defeated larger forces than yours. This island won't be your plunder." Silence thickened. Rain dripped from branches, pattered on armor. The standoff teetered on a knife's edge. Miranda glanced at the crossbowmen, their fingers poised on triggers. She willed them not to fire. Finally, the tall man spat on the ground. "You say you have farmland enough for all. I doubt that, but let's hear your terms for letting us stay. We're not suicidal if there's an easier path." Relief mingled with suspicion in Kalio's eyes. "We can arrange a parley in a neutral space. You'll hand over your weapons for the duration. We'll do the same." The man sneered. "We're not fools. You'd have us disarmed while you remain at full strength. We'll keep ours. Perhaps a smaller group meets with your leaders while the rest stand by." Miranda thought quickly. "We can meet at the watchtower or in the orchard near it. There's enough open space that neither side can easily ambush the other." She paused, reading the man's expression. "But if you come seeking to steal or conquer, you'll find we value our freedom more than our lives. We will defend it." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You've got a day to prepare. We'll come. If this is a trap, we'll burn your watchtower before we die." Thus ended the first encounter. Kalio's militia withdrew a short distance, forming a perimeter. The intruders retreated into the forest. Miranda breathed a shaky sigh. A parley was better than bloodshed, but tensions were high. If negotiations failed, a massacre might follow. They wasted no time sending riders back to the main settlement, updating Varys on the situation. He decided to join them at the watchtower. By midday of the following day, the orchard near the watchtower bustled with uneasy activity. Militia set up a wide clearing, arranged a few wooden tables, and posted watchers around the perimeter. The intruders had not yet emerged. Then, as the sun dipped behind gray clouds, the band approached in a loose column, their crossbows and spears plainly visible. The tall man led them, accompanied by half a dozen of his lieutenants. Varys, flanked by Kalio and Miranda, stepped forward. The orchard's grass was damp underfoot. Surrounded by the heavy hush of the watchers, the two groups regarded each other tensely. The tall man gave a short nod. "I'm Kyle Storm," he announced, using the Westerosi tradition for bastards of the Stormlands. "Leader of this band, if that's what we are. Call us what you will." Varys inclined his head. "Well met, Kyle Storm. I am Varys, an advisor in Haven. You likely know my reputation, though you'll find we do things differently here. We're willing to give those who come in peace a place, but not under threat. I must be direct. Will you submit to our laws, or do you intend to try to take what you want by force? Storm let out a coarse breath. You talk of laws as though the world isn't in chaos. I've seen small folk starve by the thousands in the Crownlands. Nobles hoard what's left. We escaped, traveling by ship and eventually by foot. We want land, enough to farm, enough to keep ourselves alive, and a say in how we live. Kaleo folded his arms. That's what Haven is. But we don't let armed strangers claim territory at sword point. If you'll disband as a war band and become citizens, farmers, workers, merchants, then you can join. But the moment you threaten or break our code, you'll face justice. Storm's lieutenants exchanged uneasy glances. One, a wiry man with a patchy beard, growled, "How do we know you won't reduce us to serfs? We've served lords who promised fair treatment, only to chain us with taxes and forced levies." Miranda stepped in, voice measured. "Our laws don't allow forced levies. We have a volunteer militia. Taxes exist, but they go to communal needs, harbor repairs, farmland expansions, and so forth. We can show you our code in writing." The orchard hushed again as Storm looked between them. His face softened marginally, as if disbelieving that any place could function without iron-fisted lords. "And if we say no? If we want to remain armed, keep our own structure?" Varys did not hesitate. "Then we will have no choice but to defend ourselves. We cannot abide an armed band wandering our lands, answerable to no one. Either integrate or leave. If you attack, you'll find we're no easy prize." Storm studied the orchard. He scanned the watchtower, the militia readying their weapons at the perimeter. Then he fixed his gaze on Varys with a complex expression, part anger, part yearning. "I hear you used to be a power behind kings, shaping kingdoms with whispers. Now you shape this settlement. You claim no throne, but you rule with words. I've seen the Ruin King's cause. If you're no better than them, judge us by our actions, not our titles." Varys interjected. "We've welcomed thousands who lost everything, from the Stormlands, the Crownlands, Essos, but we won't welcome marauders. Decide, quickly." Storm's men shifted restlessly, the tension palpable. Miranda could sense the weight of all their traumas. For them, war was the only language they knew. Surrendering arms felt like inviting betrayal. Yet if they fought, they'd likely die or kill many before being wiped out. A low muttering spread among the intruders. Storm conferred with his lieutenants in hushed tones. Kaleo's militia tensed. Finally, Storm exhaled a long breath. "We'll stand down, but under conditions. We keep sidearms at least for personal defense. You see to it we're not harassed. And you give us farmland or a craft so we don't starve. If your code is fair, as you say, we'll follow it." Varys and Kaleo exchanged glances. This was a delicate line. Letting them remain somewhat armed might anger other settlers who had surrendered weapons upon arrival. But refusing might spark bloodshed. At length, Varys answered, "You may keep personal arms, so long as you register them and obey the law. No large gatherings with those arms without militia oversight. The farmland is communal, but we can assign you plots to work under the Assembly's guidelines. You'll undergo the same orientation as everyone else. Break the rules, face the consequences." Storm nodded reluctantly. "We accept for now." A collective sigh passed through both sides. Weapons lowered. The orchard felt suddenly less suffocating, though rain still dripped from branches. Kaleo gave swift orders for some militia to escort the new arrivals back toward the main settlement, while another contingent secured the area. Miranda began explaining the orientation process as best she could, voice tight with relief. Tension still simmered, but at least the bloodshed was averted, for the moment. Thus, Kyle Storm and his band joined the steady stream of arrivals, testing Haven's capacity for acceptance. Varys oversaw their induction carefully, mindful that such a large group of former fighters could spark trouble if they felt disrespected. The assembly debated placing them far from the main settlement, but eventually decided scattering them in small clusters across different farmland expansions was wiser, reducing the chance they might concentrate. With each day, the population ballooned further. Beneath the veneer of unity, conflicts seethed. Some older settlers whispered that too many armed arrivals would undermine their fragile peace. Others argued that these fighters could reinforce Haven's defenses against external threats. The newly minted legal code strained under the weight of fresh complications. And so, as autumn slipped toward another winter, Varys found himself pondering the delicate balance he once strove to maintain in King's Landing. A balance of power, trust, and fear. Here, though, the stakes felt more personal. He stood not in the hidden corridors of a royal keep, but amid a fledgling society that had to navigate each challenge without the crutch of ancient institutions. Perhaps that was the settlement's greatest strength, or perhaps it would be its undoing. Each dawn, the settlement's bell tolled, calling people to labor, to council sessions, to the orchard, to the farmland. Children's laughter echoed in the lanes, weaving through the tension like a reminder of the hope that had drawn everyone here in the first place. In the harbor, merchant ships unloaded goods for winter, while Braavosi bankers haggled in crisp tones. The orchard's leaves turned russet and gold, drifting onto pathways trod by men and women from every corner of the realm and beyond. High on the watchtower, where the wind carried the tang of salt and cold, the militia kept a tireless vigil. They gazed out to the horizon, ever watchful for sails that might bear friend or foe, never quite certain which direction the next threat would come from. And in the midst of this swirl of creation, conflict, and compromise stood Varys, an aging spider, no longer weaving webs to enthrone a monarch, but carefully spinning threads of unity in a fragile tapestry of common folk. If they held fast, perhaps they would stand as a beacon of what was possible when tyranny was cast aside. If they failed, their story would join the many tragedies of a realm too often governed by swords and crowns. For now, at least, they endured.